11 minutes. Just like the contract said.
Worst hand in the deck. I dealt it 3 times in a row.
She wrote me off once. She will not get a second chance.
I had died on a Tuesday afternoon in a hospital bed in Beijing. My wife had been in the corridor checking the time. The poison was supposed to take 11 minutes. It took 9. The voices outside were not whispering. That was the part that took me a moment to register. My wife and the boy I had raised since he was 9 were standing on the other side of the door, talking about me the way people talk about a delivery that is running late. He told her not to worry. He told her, in a voice I had heard at 1,000 dinners, that the old man would be done before 5. I closed my eyes. There is a thing that happens to a man on the wrong end of a 30-year mistake. It is not anger. It is not grief. It is the click of a single quiet realization that you spent your whole life reading the wrong page of the wrong book. I had built 600 billion yuan. I had built laboratories and a foundation and a name. The smartest man in every boardroom for 30 years had missed the one conversation that mattered, and that conversation had been happening on the other side of his bedroom door the whole time. The last thing I did with my hands in that life was something they did not know I had already done. I had moved every share I owned into a trust the morning before. They could not pull a single yuan out of it after I died. I had time to listen to the boy howling about the stock price on the corridor phone. I had time to smile. Then I went out into the dark. And then I woke up. The light came in through a curtain, slanted and indifferent, and for a long moment, I did not move. The bed underneath me smelled like soap and wood smoke. The ceiling was one I had not seen since I was 18 years old. There was an old radio on the dresser. There was a poster of the 4 heavenly kings on the wall behind the door, the corners curling. There was an enamel mug on the table that said, "Serve the people," in red letters. I sat up. I looked at my hands. They were the hands of an 18-year-old. The veins were thin. The knuckles were unscarred. A system unfolded behind my eyes the way a window unfolds against a curtain. There was a number, 678 billion yuan, sitting in a private trust. Pocket cash, 12 yuan, and 5 jiao, a mall menu, half of it locked. The mall told me, politely, that the menu would refresh as my reputation grew. I was not screaming inside. I had been a billionaire for 30 years. I had been a husband for 30 years. I had been a corpse for 9 minutes. The screaming had already happened. What I felt now was the calm a man feels when he has been handed back the dice he thought he had thrown for the last time. I checked the calendar on the wall. The 14th of June, 1992. This was the day. Tonight, in 12 hours, in an abandoned cannery on the west side of town, a small-time thug named Travis was going to wait for me with a dozen of his men. I was going to walk into that courtyard alone for a girl named Tiffany, who was already done with me before the sun went down. Travis was going to put me on the ground. The injury he was going to give me there was going to define every year of the life I had just finished. I put my hands flat on the quilt. I stayed very still, and then I smiled. A voice came through the door, my mother's voice. The porridge was getting cold. I came out of the bedroom in a body I had not lived in for 30 years and walked into a kitchen I had stopped seeing decades before I left it. My mother was at the stove. My father was at the table with a folded paper. Owen was scrubbing at his hair with a towel, complaining about how cold the well water had been. My mother set a bowl of porridge on the table when she looked up. 3 eggs in a small dish, a plate of pickled greens, a stack of cornmeal flatbreads still warm enough to steam. She had no idea what she was looking at. I sat down. I picked up the bowl with both hands. I lifted it to my mouth. A man who has not tasted his mother's porridge in 30 years does not eat the way an 18-year-old eats. I went through that bowl in a way that was not appetite. It was not even hunger. It was something older than either of those words. My father lowered his paper a half inch. Owen stopped with the spoon halfway to his mouth and stared at me. "Mom," he said, "what did you put in there?" I have never seen the kid eat like this. I did not answer him. I picked up a flatbread. I ate it the same way. When the bowl was empty, I set it down very carefully. I looked at my mother for a second longer than the moment called for. My father met my eye, made a small dismissive sound about young men with their feelings, and told me to go wash my hands. My older brother Ethan came out of the back room looking for his belt. My mother said it was where it always was. He found it. Nobody at that table knew anything was different. That was the gift. I sat there and let it be the gift for a count of 30. Then I got up, told them I was going for a ride, took the old 28-inch bicycle from the lean-to behind the house, and started west. I had a name in my head before I pushed off the kickstand: Marcus. In the life I had just finished, I had been kidnapped while doing business in a country whose name does not matter, and a man named Marcus had come for me with a small unit of his own men and brought me out alive. He had been 40-something then, hard as a block of stone, the kind of man other soldiers used the words king of soldiers about and meant it. In the year I was riding into, he was 23 years old, freshly discharged for offending the wrong superior officer, living in his mother's adobe house while she died of a kidney disease he had no money to treat. I had stopped behind a stand of corn stalks on the way out and held out my hand. A wad of 100 yuan notes had appeared in it like a parlor trick. 20,000 yuan, 2 fingers thick. The trust balance had ticked down by exactly that amount. His house was the third one in from the lane, with a woodpile out front and no smoke coming from the chimney. He was at the woodpile when I came around the corner. Tall, taller than the doorway, bronze, lean. He was splitting wood without looking at it. I got off the bicycle. He stopped the axe in mid-arc. "Are you Marcus?" He did not answer. He looked at me the way a man looks at someone he has never seen, who has come up his road by name. I took the bundle of money out of my jacket and tossed it underhand to him. He caught it without thinking. The color went out of his face slowly. "That is 20,000 yuan." My voice was even. "It is for your mother. She is inside. She has uremia. Without dialysis, she will not see the autumn." He did not move. "I am hiring a bodyguard," I said. 10,000 yuan a year. The first year is in your hand." He set the axe down very carefully. "Who are you?" "Adrian Lane." "I do not know you." "You will." His jaw worked. He looked at the bundle in his hand and back at me and at the door of the house behind him. It was the look of pride trying to refuse a gift it had already counted. "This is too much. I cannot pay this back. I do not take charity. This is not charity. This is hire. I have somewhere to be tonight at 8. You are coming with me." He looked at me for a long count. Through the door of the house, I could hear a thin sound of someone breathing in a way that is not quite breathing. "All right." His voice was flat. "I will take it. This money saves my mother. I will not call this employment. I owe you a life. As long as I am alive, I will protect you. 8 o'clock, the abandoned cannery on the west side of town. Bring the bike." He nodded once. I rode home, and I felt the day click into place underneath me, the way a key clicks into a lock that has been waiting for it for 30 years. Marcus picked me up at sundown. He pedaled, and I sat on the back rack, and he carried me west of town the way a freight train carries a single passenger. The cannery had been a state-owned star a decade earlier and was now a corpse. The walls were brick and crumbling. The gate was twisted off one hinge. The yard was head-high with weeds in the corners. The roof of the main building had a tree growing through it. Tiffany was at the gate in a bright red shirt with batwing sleeves and tight black pants with foot straps. She had a perm she had clearly done herself. She had bubblegum in her teeth and a cigarette in her left hand, and she was waving at me with it as if she were flagging down a taxi. In the life I had just finished, she had been the first big mistake of my adulthood. I had carried her name around for a long time. Looking at her now, with 30 years of distance behind my eyes, I could not understand who I had been. She was not pretty. She was not interesting. She was a sound a girl makes in a particular shirt. She started in on me before Marcus had set the kickstand. Travis's sister Lacey had insulted her on the road this morning. Lacey was inside with her brother. I had to do something about it. The summary was that her pride had been bruised, and I was going to bleed for the dressing. Then she saw Marcus. She placed him as the soldier from the next village, the one with the dying mother. She told me he was a bumpkin. She told me I was embarrassing her in front of everyone. I told her to shut her mouth. I told her Marcus was my brother. I told her it was no longer her place to talk about anyone of mine. She blinked at me. Then she screeched and lunged. She did not reach me. Marcus stepped between us with his hands still in his pockets and put a flat boot into her stomach, and she went up and back into the weeds the way a kicked sack goes. 2 of her hoodlum friends came off the curb at him with brick-handed enthusiasm. He took them apart in the time it takes a man to think about taking them apart. Lacey came out of the weeds barefoot, lost a shoe in the grass, and ran for the gate without looking back. Marcus put his hands back in his pockets. He looked at me. "Inside," I said. Travis was already inside. He came out of the broken doorway with his men around him in a loose half circle. He was bald. He had a gold chain on him as thick as a dog leash. He had a tattoo running up the side of his neck. He had a machete at his hip the way a clerk has a pen. He took one look at me and dismissed me. He took one look at Marcus and stopped. He read Marcus the way men of his rank read men of Marcus's rank. He saw the build, the calm, the hands. He took a pack of cigarettes out of his shirt pocket, slid one out, and held it up between two fingers in the firelight. He told Marcus that a man with a posture like that had to have come up rough, and that the west side of town was his side, and that good men were always wanted on his side. He paraphrased himself the way a man like Travis paraphrases himself, in big, round, empty words. Then, he told Marcus that as soon as the two of them had finished beating up the piece of trash on the bicycle, they were going to find a quiet place. He used my name when he said it. Marcus took the cigarette. He looked at it. He flicked it down into the dirt without lighting it. "You are Travis." The word was flat. Travis was already smiling. "You want to hit Adrian." Travis was still smiling. Marcus broke his nose with one punch. It was a short punch, no shoulder behind it. The sound of it was the sound a butcher makes setting a cleaver down on a wet cutting board. Travis went off his feet and back into his own men. The dozen of them came off the wall at Marcus all at once. They had pickaxe handles and lengths of pipe, and one of them had a machete. Marcus took them apart inside 2 minutes. He told me later, on the road home, that this had not been a fight in any meaning of the word he respected. He said in the army he had been taught true killing, and that a dozen drunks with farm tools were not even an exercise. He had said it without pride. It had been a clean assessment, the way another man would assess weather. When the last of them went down, Travis was on his knees in the rubble. His mouth was bleeding. He was holding both hands up. He was swearing he submitted. He was swearing he and I were brothers from this night forward. I walked across the courtyard. Marcus stood aside for me. Marcus said, "Lo, he is faking, boss." "I know." I bent at the wall. There was rubble at the foot of it, half bricks weathered gray and green. I picked one up. It was heavier than I remembered a brick being. I looked down at Travis. I was looking at the man who, in the life I had just finished, had walked away from this courtyard while I was on the ground, and had cost me 30 years of a life I had not known I was missing until the corridor outside my hospital room. I told him he had been right about one thing. We were going to be brothers from this night forward, in the way an old debt makes brothers, of the man who owes it and the man who is collecting. I ended his threat in one decisive blow. I set the brick down on top of the half-collapsed wall when I was done. I did not look at the body. I walked past it. The hoodlums who were still conscious carried Travis out of the courtyard without making eye contact with anyone. I walked out into the road. The dusk was gone. There were stars over the fields. The cannery yard behind me was very quiet. The system chimed behind my eyes the moment my foot hit the dirt outside the gate. A small message in white. Reputation, level 2. The mall refreshed. 3 new lines appeared. A bottle of pure water, 10 yuan, replaceable once a day. 10 caddies of high-grade meat, 1,000 yuan, replaceable once a week. And on the third line, the one that mattered. A skill listed as God of Gamblers card sharping for 10 million yuan. There was a small line under it offering an upgrade to God tier for an additional 100 million. I bought the skill. I bought the upgrade. The balance ticked down. I felt the install, a strange feeling, like a nerve being switched on that had been dormant since I was born. My fingers went through a small motion on their own, the way a man's hand moves through the motion of writing his own signature when he has not written it in a year. I thought about Ethan. In the life I had just finished, he was going to be sat down at a rigged poker table inside the month. He was going to lose the family homestead. He was going to lose 20,000 yuan in promissory notes to people he should never have been at a table with. The smartest man in any boardroom for 30 years had not been there to read the trick. The smartest man in any boardroom had been busy in Beijing with a wife and an adopted son. The card sharping skill was the answer to the table. It was not the answer to muscle. Marcus was the answer to muscle. The answer to the table was sitting in my hands now, behind my eyes, and Ethan was not going to lose anything this time. I was about to get on the back of the bicycle when a pair of headlights came up the dirt road from the city side. A sedan in better condition than anything you usually saw on these roads. A man in a windbreaker got out of the passenger side. A second man got out of the back. He was older. He was wearing a suit that had been bought in another country. I knew who they were. The one in the windbreaker was Marvin, who had run this cannery before the state had let it go. The one in the suit was Sterling, a buyer from Hong Kong who wanted to bulldoze the buildings flat and put up apartments that would not sell on land he was hoping to get for under a third of what it was worth. In the life I had just finished, this was the deal that had set the whole edge of my hometown in motion for the next decade. The Hong Kong man had bought the cannery for a song. The workers had not gotten their pensions. Marvin had been quietly broken by the failure of a thing he had spent his life on. I stood in the road in the dark. Marvin and Sterling walked into the cannery yard, talking. Sterling told Marvin the place was a wreck. Sterling told Marvin nobody from the South would buy a flat in a place like this. Sterling was opening the bidding low. I did not introduce myself. I did not need to. There was tomorrow morning for that. I memorized the angle of Sterling's chin. I memorized the way Marvin held his hands behind his back, the way a man who has been a director holds them when he is no longer a director. I told Marcus, quietly, to start the bicycle. The first day of my second life had cost me 20,000 yuan in cash, one decision in a courtyard, and 110 million from a trust I was not going to need to count for the rest of my natural life. It had bought me a bodyguard sworn to me on his mother's life, an enemy crossed off the list before the list had a name, a mall full of new options, and a deal walking up the road on its own 2 feet before I had even sat down to plan it. I got on the back of the bicycle. The cannery walls fell away behind us, and the road home opened up. The porridge was going to be cold by the time I got to it. My mother was going to be at the table, and my father was going to be at the table, and Ethan was going to be at the table, and Owen was going to be at the table, and that was the only part of any of this that mattered. I went home for dinner. The next evening, I rode back to the cannery on the back of Marcus's bicycle with 30,000 yuan folded against my ribs and a deal already worked out in my head. I had materialized the cash that morning behind the corn stalks. The trust balance had ticked down by exactly 30,000. I had told my mother I was going into town to look at a piece of equipment for a friend. My father had grunted at the paper and asked which friend. My mother had told him to leave the boy alone. The cannery was lit from the inside this time. A single bulb burning in the office at the back of the courtyard. A sedan parked in the yard. A man in a suit standing beside it, smoking a Marlboro with the easy patience of a man sure he has already won. Sterling. He did not see me at first. I left Marcus by the bicycle and walked across the yard toward the office. Sterling lifted his chin at me as I passed, the way a man lifts his chin at a delivery boy, and went back to his cigarette. I did not stop. I went up the 3 concrete steps and stood at the office door and listened. Marvin was at his desk in his old gray mouse suit, with 3 cigarette ends in the saucer beside his elbow, and a 4th one burning between his fingers. He was not looking up. The desk in front of him had a brown envelope on it, fat and creased. Sterling had left it there as a parting gift on the way out for his cigarette. 20,000 yuan was more money than the man behind that desk had handled across his entire career. 8 years of his salary. It was sitting there as a quiet, polite suggestion that he could have it if he forgot about 50 other men he had promised the winter coal to. He was not looking at it. That was the thing I had come in to verify before I knocked. The cigarette was burning down between his fingers, and he had forgotten he was holding it. I knocked once on the open door and walked in. He looked up. His face was tired in the way of a man watching his life close behind him for a year. He started to say something about the office being closed. He stopped. He put the cigarette out. I heard the negotiation from the door. He blinked. I heard him offer 50,000 for the factory and 20,000 for you. I heard you tell him to take his money and go. I am here to tell you he was bidding with the wrong wallet. His mouth opened. He looked at me. He looked at the doorway behind me, where Marcus had come up the steps, and was now filling it like a piece of architecture. Hands in his pockets. Expression flat. I took the bundle of 30,000 yuan out of the inside of my jacket and set it down on the desk next to Sterling's envelope. The 2 stacks sat there in front of him for a long second. Mine was bigger. That is 30,000. It is a down payment. The full price is the asking price. 150,000 yuan, the resettlement of all 50 workers paid in full, every man rehired with a 50% raise. I will pay the rest in cash by Friday. The contract goes through through the bureau the way it would have gone through if a man from Beijing had signed it. The factory reopens tomorrow morning. His hand started to come up to his face. He caught it halfway and put it back down on the desk. This is, he said, my classmates from the university in Beijing are fronting the operating capital. Their families have money they want placed in the regions while the regions are still cheap. I am the local face. The names will not appear on any paper that crosses your bureau. The cash will. It was not a story that would survive a week of investigation, but it was a story that would survive the hour. Marvin needed something to tell himself before he signed. I gave him the something. He took it. He looked down at the bundle. He looked at me. The hand came up again. This time, it stayed up. It was over his mouth. This is not a thing a young man does. It is. I have to ask, he said, and his voice was hoarse, where the money came from. You have asked. I have answered. The contract will be clean. The workers will be paid. That is the part you keep your eyes on. He nodded. He nodded again. He picked up the cigarette case on the desk and offered me one. I shook my head. He nodded a third time as if he had expected it. He fumbled one out for himself, lit it, and the smoke went up in a perfectly straight line because his hand was finally still. There was a footstep in the doorway behind me. Sterling came in the way a man comes back into a room he believes he owns. He had heard voices. He had heard Marvin's voice rise. He had finished his cigarette in the yard and decided his patience had been adequately demonstrated. He stopped halfway in. He looked at the bundle on the desk. He looked at Marvin's face. He looked at me. His eyebrows went up and he laughed once. The sharp, impatient laugh of a businessman who is about to set a child straight. He started speaking, paraphrasing himself the way men in suits paraphrase themselves when they are stalling for the right line. The summary of what he said was that mainland boys in his experience did not understand business, and that walking into another man's negotiation with a stack of pocket money was a thing children did, and that the factory had already been sold in everything but signature, and that nobody at his headquarters in Hong Kong was going to be impressed by a teenager in a work shirt. He raised his voice on the last sentence. Marvin's face went white. I crossed the room. I did not say anything. I did not raise my voice. I covered the 4 steps between the desk and where Sterling stood and brought my open hand across his cheek once, flat and low, the way a teacher in this part of the country had used to slap a boy who would not stop talking. The sound of it was small. The room went very quiet around it. Sterling's gold-rimmed glasses went sideways on his face, and he stood there with one hand at his cheek and his mouth half open. On this land, I said, you are not bidding with the right wallet. Take your envelope and get out. He did not move. Marcus moved. Not far. A quarter step into the doorway. No more. Hands still in his pockets. The doorway behind Sterling was suddenly the only doorway in the world. Sterling's hand came down off his cheek. He looked at the brown envelope on the desk for a long second. Then he picked it up. He did not look at Marvin. He did not look at me. He walked out of the office past Marcus, the way a man walks past a hot stove. The sound of the sedan starting in the courtyard came through the office wall a moment later, and the headlights swept across the yellowed calendar on the wall, and the sedan went out the gate and was gone. Marvin sat at his desk with both hands flat on the wood. He did not say anything for a long count. Boss Lin, he said finally, I have not signed a deal in 23 years where the buyer slapped the other buyer out of my office. You have signed one tonight, he laughed. It was a small, wet laugh, and it broke at the end. He picked up his pen. He pulled a triplicate form out of the drawer. He uncapped the pen. His hand was steady now. I sat down across from him for the first time. I watched him fill in the lines. I watched him put the cap back on the pen. I watched him push the form across the desk to me. I signed it, Adrian Lane. He read the signature. He looked up at me. He looked at the bundle on the desk. He looked at me again. Boss Lin, he said, the workers. Tell them now, tonight. Get them out of bed if they are in bed. The factory reopens tomorrow at the start of shift. Every man back on the books at half pay above what he was making the day they shut the gates. Anyone who walks back through that gate tomorrow morning eats meat at lunch. He stood up. He pushed his chair back hard enough that it scraped against the floor. He did not put on his jacket. He went out the office door at a half run with the contract in his hand. And a moment later, I could hear his voice across the courtyard at the entrance to the workers' dormitory shouting names. I did not go down. I stayed at the window of the office and watched. Marvin reached the dormitory door. He hammered on it. He shouted a name, then another name. The first window lit, a second window lit, a third. Men came out of the dormitory in singlets and undershirts and worn padded trousers, blinking against the lantern light, complaining at first, and then catching the look on his face and falling silent. He told them. He told them every word. He told them what the offer had been, and what the offer had become, and what the down payment on the desk meant. He told them the gate opened at 6 in the morning, and every man who had been laid off in March was back on the books with a 50% raise. The first sound was not a cheer. It was a sound I had not heard in 30 years and could not have described before that night. It was the sound a room full of men make when they have been told their winter is going to come with coal in the stove after all. Some of them sat down on the dormitory step. Some of them put their hands flat against the brick wall. One of them, I could see him from the office window, a small bent old man in a cotton singlet, took 2 steps out into the courtyard and went down on his knees in the dirt facing the office and put his forehead to the ground. 3 more went down with him. These were men who had given 30 years to a state factory and had been told in March that the state had no further use for them. They had spent the spring and summer watching the gate, knowing that whoever bought the building was not going to keep them on. The slap I had given Sterling in the office was the slap they had not been able to give him themselves. The 50% raise was their winter coal. The kowtow was the only thing they had left to offer me. The system chimed behind my eyes. A small white message. Reputation increased 200 points. Mall progress at 200 out of 400 toward level 3. The progress bar filled in the corner of my vision a third of the way. The mall remained as it was. Water, meat, the card sharping skill I had already bought. There was nothing new yet. I stood at the window with my hands in my pockets and watched Marvin go down the dormitory step and walk among them, lifting them up one at a time off their knees. I did not go down. The audience for the kowtow was supposed to be the man who had paid for it, and I had decided, somewhere inside the office, while my hand was still cooling from the slap, that I was not going to be that man. Marcus came up beside me at the window. He looked out for a long second. He did not say anything for a long count. Then he said, "Lo, if they are going to eat meat at lunch tomorrow, the meat has to come from somewhere reliable. I know a peach farmer west of here. Tomorrow," I said. "Tonight, get a man on the road back to the farmhouse. Have him stay near the lane. Anybody comes up the lane, I want to know about it before they reach the gate." His eyes flicked to me at that. He did not ask. He nodded once. The men were still in the courtyard. Marvin was still in the courtyard. The lanterns were still moving in the dormitory windows. The first day after Travis was 11 hours old and the cannery was already mine. We left an hour later. Marvin caught us at the gate before we got on the bicycle. He had brought a man with him, short, thin, weathered, in a cotton work shirt with the cuffs rolled, missing 2 teeth on the upper left side of his mouth. The man was the foreman of the canning floor. He had worked at the cannery for 19 years. He had 3 children. He was the kind of man who knew everyone in his half of the county by their grandfathers. Marvin introduced him. The foreman bowed twice, low, and said nothing. Marvin said the foreman had something to tell me. The foreman looked at Marcus. He looked at me. He had the expression of a man who has decided he is going to say a thing that does not belong to him. What he told me, paraphrased through what he was willing to put into words, was that his wife's brother worked as a watchman at an estate on the east edge of town, and that the watchman had been awake all afternoon. The estate belonged to Travis's father. The father had heard around noon what had been done to his son in the courtyard the night before. The cost his son had paid had been confirmed by the doctor in the city hospital that morning. The cost was permanent. The watchman had heard a scarred man in the front room propose, in plain language, that the answer was to come up the lane to my farmhouse tonight and take my parents off it. He had heard Travis's father slap the scarred man across the room. He had heard the father ask who the man with me last night had been. The answer had 2 words in it, the name of the unit and the rank. Travis's father had not spoken for a long count after that. Then he had said one sentence. A gentleman's revenge was never too late, and nothing was going to happen until he had a clean picture of who Marcus was and where his line of friends ran. The foreman said the watchman had thought I should know. I thanked him. I did not give him money. He waved a hand at the suggestion before I made it. He bowed twice more. Marvin walked him back toward the dormitory. I stood at the gate in the dark. Marcus stood beside me. He did not ask. He had heard every word. 2 men on the lane from tomorrow. I said. Day and night, from the cannery payroll. Pay them double. They watch for cars and strangers. Anybody who is not from the village does not get past the bend in the road without one of them in the bicycle ditch with a pipe, he nodded. And the man you said you knew, I said. The peach farmer. The two of us are going to see him at sunup, he nodded again. I got on the back of the bicycle. The road home was the same road I had ridden the night before. The sky over the cannery looked the same. Nothing was the same. Travis had been a small bill. I had paid it last night. Travis's father was a larger one. He was going to sit at his desk in his black suit and rotate his decorative walnuts in his palm and wait for a clean picture of Marcus's friends. And the wait was going to be the part of him I would have to outlive. I had bought a cannery and 50 men in one evening. I had bought myself a slow-burning enemy in the same evening. The arithmetic of the second life was clearer to me than it had been before dinner. The porridge would not be hot tonight. My mother would have left a bowl on the stove. My father would be asleep with the paper folded across his chest. I went home for dinner. The morning after the cannery deal closed, I rode back to the factory with Marvin to walk the worker rolls. The afternoon I spent signing names. The sun was already going down when Marcus and I rode home. The date in my head was lit up like a fire on a hilltop. The night Ethan, in the life I had just finished, had taken a red cloth bundle out from under the Kong and had not come back the same man. The night that 3 weeks later had ended in a barn outside the village. The bicycle came around the bend in the lane, and I lifted my hand for Marcus to slow. 2 men were squatting on the threshold of my own front gate. 2 men in cheap factory uniforms, smoking, talking. Spike and Slim, the 2 of them. I knew them the way you know a dog that bit you when you were a child. The names I gave them belonged to this life. The faces did not. Ethan was inside the courtyard, just inside the gate, on a low stool with his elbows on his knees. He had a cigarette burning in his hand he had not drawn on. His shirt was the blue cotton of the construction bureau, and it was already stained with sweat at the collar. The 2 of them had been at him for an hour. I could read the shape of it from 20 meters away. I told Marcus to stop and lean the bicycle against the wall under the pear tree. He did. We stood at the bend in the lane in the failing light and listened. The shape of what they were saying was a thing I had heard before. Their tone was friendly. Their words were soft. They were telling Ethan that his luck last week had been a coins flip thing, that any man at the table that night could have caught the wrong river card, that everyone in the south room had seen the moment when his hand had been 1 spade short. They were telling him about Lillian. They used her name. They mentioned the surgery, 10,000 yuan at the city hospital, the kind of money a construction bureau engineer did not see in a year, the way a man mentions the weather. They were telling him that the table tonight was a smaller table and a softer table and a kinder table, and that they would be at his shoulder, and that a man with the right hand and the right friends did not stay poor for long. Ethan did not answer for a while. The cigarette burned down. Then he stood up. He went into the house. I heard a door open inside and a wooden lid scrape against a Kong frame. He came back out with a small red cloth bundle in his fist. 2,000 yuan, the savings of a married man with a sick wife and no children, hidden in the only place in a rural farmhouse a man could hide a thing, under the Kong, behind the brick. He told the parents through the door he was going to a co-worker's birthday in town. My mother's voice came back, asking if it was the man with the bicycle from the survey unit. He said yes. She said home by midnight. He came out and walked past the gate without seeing me. Spike and Slim flanked him. They went down the lane toward the road into town. Marcus came up beside me. He did not look at me. He looked at the receding shape of the 3 of them on the lane. Boss, should we move? No, that is your brother. That is my brother. I watched the 3 of them turn at the road. He is going to a table tonight that I have known about for 30 years. The first time he went to it, I was a long way away and I was rich and I was busy. The second time he went to it, I am right behind him and I am rich and I am here. The intervention I came back to make is not at this gate. It is at the chair he is about to sit in. There is no version of standing here and saying to him, do not go. There is only the version where he goes, he sits, he loses, and at the bottom of the loss, I am at the next chair. That is the rescue that holds for 30 years. Marcus did not answer. He did not need to. Get the bicycle, I said. We follow at a distance. The casino was a 3-story guest house on a corner 2 streets back from the main road. The sign on the front said Town Guest House in painted characters that had been new in the late 70s. The building had not seen a real overnight guest in years. The bar lights on the second floor were on. The third-floor windows were shuttered. There was a black sedan parked at the curb that did not belong to anyone in this town, and a white sedan behind it that did not either. 2 German shepherds were chained either side of the door. Big animals, glossy coats, better fed than half the men inside. Spike tossed something low to them as he passed. They did not bark. They snuffled the bones and went on, lying flat. He had thrown bones to them on the way out enough times that they knew his footstep. We came up behind them at a count of 20. The dogs lifted their heads at us. They looked at me first. They looked at Marcus. The first dog lay down. The second dog lay down. The first one rolled half onto its side. The second tucked its head between its paws. Marcus did not look at them. He had not changed his face. We went up the steps and inside. The casino had been a hotel lobby once. Somebody had pushed the desk against the wall and put 12 mismatched gambling tables out where the lounge furniture had been. The chandelier had not been cleaned in 5 years. Half the bulbs were out. 40 men in the room. No woman on the floor. The third-floor stairway in the back was guarded by 2 heavy men in suit jackets with the cuffs rolled. The bulges at their waistbands were not metaphors. Ethan was at a table in the southwest corner where the smoke was thickest. The game was fried golden flour. 3 cards. The local table version. 5 men around the table. The pot was small, but the stack in front of Ethan was already big. He had 4,000 yuan in front of him, mostly in 100 yuan notes, some of it in 50s, neat in a small heap. The cigarette in his fingers was not lit anymore. His left leg was jumping under the table. He was winning. Spike was behind him, both hands on his shoulders, working at the muscle at the base of Ethan's neck the way a cornerman works a fighter between rounds. Slim had drifted off to a stool against the wall behind a balding man at the same table, watching, smiling at no one in particular. I crossed the room without looking at the table and leaned against a pillar 20 feet from Ethan's chair. Marcus stayed at my left shoulder, against the same pillar. The 2 of us were 2 men leaning on a pillar in a casino. We had business of our own. Nobody at any table looked twice. Then I let myself look. The God of Gamblers card sharping skill had been installed in me for 36 hours. I had not used it yet. It had sat behind my eyes the way a new pair of glasses sits in a drawer the morning after you buy them. I took the lid off it now. The room sharpened. The smoke in front of me moved in slower currents. Across 20 feet of casino air, I could see the faint print on the back of the cards in Ethan's hand. I could see the dust on the chandelier. I could hear, under the room noise, the thumb of a man at a different table running across the edge of his deck and counting. I could see the way Ethan's pulse was beating in the side of his neck. He was at 5,000 yuan now and rising, and his pulse was at 110. Spike fanned him. The summary of it was that the balding man across the table had a gold ring he was waving at the pot, and that a man with a hot hand and a wife who needed surgery did not let a gold ring leave a small town table. Ethan called the bet. He won. He went to 7,000. The balding man slammed his cards down, swore at the deck, said something about a clumsy man and a streak that did not belong to him, and got up. He walked out of the lobby still cursing. The chair he had vacated did not stay empty for long. A man in a satin tang suit and a pair of cheap sunglasses pulled it back, settled into it, and laid a small green felt cloth on the table in front of him, as if the table did not already have felt. He had 2 decorative walnuts in his left hand. He rolled them against each other in a slow rhythm, click and click and click, the way a man clicks rosary beads. Mike, little mustache. The dealer the casino ran out when it was time to take the pig. He proposed the rules in a smooth, friendly voice. 100 yuan ante, no upper limit. Eat as you can. Ethan hesitated. Spike leaned over his shoulder. The summary was a single word he said in his ear about Lillian's surgery, and a single nod he gave at the 4 chips Ethan had in front of him. Ethan agreed. Mike shuffled. I want you to know what I saw. I saw him shuffle the deck twice with a riffle that looked like a riffle. I saw him pull the deck back toward his sleeve on the second riffle 1.5 millimeters farther than a clean shuffle would have pulled it. I saw 2 cards leave the deck. I saw one come back. I saw the second one ride up his sleeve into the cuff and stop there. The motion was the smoothest piece of handwork I had seen in either of my lives. From across the room with the system running in my head, it read as clearly as a drawing in a book. I murmured to Marcus that the show was starting. Marcus said nothing. He was watching the 3rd floor stare. The first hand was small. Mike bet blind 200. Ethan called. Mike raised 300. Ethan looked at his cards. He had something. His shoulders shifted half an inch. He raised. Mike raised again. They went around the table twice. Mike took the pot with a pair on a flop he had read before he sat down. Ethan was at 6,000 now. The momentum from the early hands had not broken yet. He was telling himself the next hand would set him right. The next hand was the hand Mike dealt. Ethan picked his 3 cards up. He kept his face still, but his neck pulse went up to 120. He had a J of spades, a Q of hearts, a K of diamonds, a straight mixed suits, the second best hand at this table. In fried golden flour, a straight is the kind of hand a man bets the room with. Mike bet blind. 500. Ethan called. 500. Mike raised. 1,000. Ethan called. He was at 5,500 in front of him. Mike raised. 2,000. Ethan called. He was at 3,500. Mike raised again. The next number out of Mike's mouth was bigger than the stack Ethan had in front of him. Ethan stared at the table. His hand on the cards had gone white at the knuckle. He counted his own chips 3 times the way a man counts a thing that has not changed between counts. He looked at Spike. Spike's hand came down on his shoulder. Spike pointed across the room toward a small window in a back wall I had not paid attention to. There was a desk inside the window. There was a brass plate on the desk that said in characters I could read at 20 feet that the casino's loan office was open. Spike said her name, Catherine. A woman crossed the floor. She was in her late 20s. She was tall. She was in a black velvet dress that fit her without needing to advertise that it fit her. Her hair was pulled back, and she had a small jade pin in it. Her face was the face of a woman who had been a beautiful child and had stopped finding it interesting around 20. She came across the casino floor as though the casino floor was an annoyance she was crossing on the way to somewhere else. She stopped at Ethan's chair. She did not look at his cards. She did not look at Mike. She looked at Spike, briefly, the way you look at a tool you have been told to pick up. Then she looked at Ethan. Her question was not a question. She asked him if he knew the rules. Did he know what 9 out, 13 back meant? Ethan did not. She told him. She told him in 3 sentences. He could borrow 20,000 yuan. He would receive 18,000 in his hand. The repayment was 26,000 within the term. The collateral, on a number that size, would be paper. The deed to the homestead and the 30-year land use contract. There was a small ledger book at her elbow she had not opened. She did not need to open it. The terms were the terms. I watched my brother's face. In the life I had just finished, this was the moment I had not been there for. My older brother had sat across this table 30 years ago with a sick wife at home and 3 coins of pride left to him, and he had signed his life away to a stranger in a black dress for the sound of a JQK straight in a game he had played 4 times. In the life I had just finished, 3 weeks after this signature, my older brother had walked out to a barn behind the village with a brown bottle. In the life I was in now, I was 12 feet from his chair, and the only thing I was permitted to do was wait. He signed. He signed his name on the ledger book she opened in front of him. He signed his name on a piece of receipt paper she slid across after the ledger. He signed his name on the deed to the homestead. The handwriting on the 3rd signature was already shaking. She slid the 18,000 across the table in cash. He pushed 18,000 across the table to Mike. Mike turned his cards over. Q of diamonds, K of clubs, A of hearts. A straight one, rank above Ethan's straight, the highest straight in the deck. The room around the table made a sound that was not a sound. The small inhale a circle of men makes when they have all just watched a kill they did not expect to watch tonight. Mike pulled the pot. The cards went into the discard. Catherine closed her ledger book. She turned without looking at Ethan a second time. She went back across the floor toward the loan window with the deed in her hand. Ethan slapped himself across the face. The sound of it was loud enough to turn 3 nearby tables. He slapped himself again. He said in a voice that was not a voice he had used in this lifetime that he was not human, that he was a beast, that he had killed his own family. His fingers were shaking on the edge of the table. He started to stand up, and his knees gave out, and he went back down on the chair, and his forehead came down on the green felt. I crossed the room. I came up to his chair and stood at his shoulder. Marcus arrived at mine. Mike, with the pot in his hands, looked at me, and the small grin he had been wearing went still. Spike, behind Ethan, took a quarter step back without realizing it. I put my hand on the back of Ethan's neck. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at Mike. I did not look at Spike. I looked at the back of my brother's head. "Big brother," I said, "why are you crying?" I crouched at my my brother's chair. I put my hand under his elbow and helped him sit up. I did not look at Mike. I did not look at Spike. I let the room outside the chair stay outside the chair. Big brother, does it hurt? He could not look at me. The cigarette smoke and the chandelier light caught the wet on his cheek where he had slapped himself. He nodded. He nodded again. The shoulders of the construction bureau uniform were shaking. I am going to ask you one question. I am going to ask it once. Will you ever gamble in this lifetime again? He looked up at me then. His eyes were red and there was blood on his lip from the inside of his teeth. He shook his head. He shook his head harder. The words came out in a wreck of a voice. Never, never, even if he starved, even if he had to beg in the street, even if his wife went without medicine. He swore on the household register. He swore on our parents. He said that if he ever touched a card again in this lifetime, he would chop the hands off himself. I held his eyes for a count of 3. Remember what you said. This is the last time you cry over a table. I stood up. I did not look at Spike. I did not look at Mike. I walked across the room without hurrying through the smoke and the watching faces. The path to the lone window in the back wall opened in front of me, the way a path opens for a man whose face nobody at any of the other tables wanted to read. Catherine was at the window, behind the counter on a tall stool with the ledger book open in front of her, and the deed to my parents' homestead pinned on top of it under a small brass weight. Her hand was flat across the deed, the way a banker rests a hand on a stack. She watched me come. I want you to understand the way she watched me come. The first time she had crossed the floor toward Ethan's table, she had not been looking at any of us. The walk had been a transaction in motion. The way she watched me come now was different. It was the small adjustment a professional makes when she realizes a man she had taken for one weight is something else. The hand on the deed flexed half an inch. The eyes moved to my shoulders, then to Marcus's, then back to mine. I came up to the window. I took the bundle of money out from inside my jacket. Marcus had been carrying it the whole evening. I set it on the counter. I counted it once in front of her. $20,000 for the principal, $10,000 for the 9 out, 13 back interest at the small percentage rate she had quoted Ethan. The math came out at $30,000 on the nose. I did not say anything. She did not say anything either. She picked up the deed. She picked up the IOU paper my brother had signed beside it. She held both up briefly to the desk lamp and inspected the seals the way a banker inspects a seal. Then she threw the paper to me underhand across the counter. The deed she set down on top of the bundle of bills. I caught the IOU. I held it in front of me at chest height. The bloody handprint Ethan had pressed onto it earlier was a half thumb on the lower edge of the paper. I tore the paper in half across the bloody print. I tore the halves into quarters. I let the pieces drop on the counter beside the bundle. The casino floor took a half step inward toward the window. Catherine looked at the pieces. She looked at me. The professional adjustment in her face had advanced one click. Do you have a name? It was the first time her voice was directed at me. 3 words. The pitch was lower than I had expected. The accent was city, not town. Adrian Lane. She nodded once, the small nod of a person filing a fact she has no intention of forgetting. She did not give her own name back. I did not ask. The deed on top of the money was already mine. I picked the deed up, folded it in 3, and put it into the inside pocket of my jacket where the money had been. I walked back across the floor toward the table where Mike was still sitting. Marcus a step behind. Ethan tried to stand up out of the chair as I passed. Marcus caught his elbow without looking and put him back down on the chair. And Marcus said, "Lo, 3 words I will remember for the rest of my second life. Trust your brother." I sat down across from Mike. I put what was left of the cash on the felt. The remaining 30,000 yuan, neat and counted in 3 stacks. I dealt myself in. The 5 other men at the table had quietly become 4 other men at the table at the sight of the deed walking back in my pocket. 2 stools were empty. 2 stools held men who were waiting to see what kind of a thing they were about to see. Mike's mouth opened. He laughed. I want to summarize what he said, because his voice does not get to be in this room directly. He told me what was a kid going to play with at his table. He told me my brother had lost the family clothes. He told me my pockets were empty. He told me, smiling, that he had no use for whatever it was a teenager from a farmhouse thought he had to put down on the felt. I took the cigarette case off the corner of the table where someone had left it, and I pushed it gently to one side. I have plenty of money. His eyebrows came up. How much, kid? Maybe a few $100 billion. The room laughed. Mike laughed loudest. The walnuts in his hand started clicking again. I let the laugh land. I watched his shoulders relax half an inch. I watched the small grin come back onto Spike's face behind my chair. Spike had drifted around the table to my back the moment I sat down, hand on the chair back. The same shoulder massage he had given Ethan ready in his fingers. Slim was at Mike's right shoulder again. The signaler positions were already set. The cheat was already running. The god of gambler's skill behind my eyes pulled the room into focus. I could see Mike's right cuff in detail across the table. There was a card stowed in the lining. I could see the edges of the felt cloth on Mike's side of the table, where his thumb had pressed down 2 small marks last hand to count cards. I could see Spike's pulse jumping in the soft of his throat. I could see, in the side mirror over the bar across the room, the angle Slim was tilting his head to read what would be in my hand when the cards went down. "What are we playing?" Mike's mouth widened. He proposed Texas Hold'em, the variant the tables had been running all night. 3 cards a hand. Simple, direct, no brainpower required. Fine. Mike shuffled. He shuffled the way a man shuffles when he has shuffled this same shuffle 10,000 times. The cards came down. Mine came face down to my left. His came face down to his left. I did not pick mine up. I let them sit. He picked his up. He looked at them. The walnuts paused. He laid the cards face down again. He began the bet. I picked my own cards up at last. A 7 of hearts, a 7 of diamonds, a 7 of spades, 3 sevens, a leopard, the 3rd highest hand the variant could deal. 2 cards above it in the deck, a leopard of 8s and a leopard of 9s. The 4th highest hand was any straight. The 5th highest was a flush. Across the table, I could see Mike's hand by reading what his thumb had done on the felt. He had a 2, a 5, and a 9, all hearts, a flush, the 5th highest hand. He was about to bet his apartment on a hand that was going to lose to the cards I was holding. The trick lit up in my head, the way a lit up street lights up at night. I cupped the 7 of spades in my left hand with the others as I tidied them. I pulled a single dark hair from the back of my head with my right hand under the table. Slow, no shoulder, the way the skill made the motion small. I laid the hair across the spade pip in the center of the 7 of spades in a curve. Looked at from the angle of a man 2 paces behind my chair, the spade pip became the tail of a 9. From the angle of Spike's position, the card now read as a 9 of spades. I turned and showed Mike I was looking at my hand. I tilted the cards towards Spike for a half second longer than I needed to. I read Spike's eyes register what they thought they were reading. Spike coughed twice. The signal was as clean a reading as a bookkeeper would write. Pair, not large. Adrian has 2 sevens and a 9. Mike has the flush. Mike pulled his cards up to look at them again, as if he were checking them for the first time. He grinned. He put the cards down. He bet 2,000. I called. He raised. I called. He raised. I called. He went all in. I want you to understand the size of that all in. He shoved the 20-some thousand he had on the felt across the line. He told me, with the kind of slow grin a man wears when he is about to take a 30,000 yuan pot off a teenager, that I had 30,000 on the felt, and I was going to call or fold, and either was going to be fine for him. I did not call. I went over the top. I told him I was raising another 20,000, the 30,000 on the felt plus 20 more from inside my jacket. Marcus reached past my shoulder, set the second bundle on the felt, and stepped back. The pot was at 50,000 on each side, and Mike's stack was empty. He turned to Catherine. He shouted across the floor for the loan window. He shouted that he was good for 20,000. He shouted that the apartment in the city was on the deed under his name. He named the address. Catherine looked at him for a long second. She looked at me. I held her eye long enough that she could read the small grin I was not bothering to hide. The grin was 3 words long. The grin said leopard, not flush. She turned back to Mike. She wrote a line in her ledger. She slid 20,000 yuan across the floor in a fresh wad. He took it. He pushed it onto the felt. The pot was at 100,000. He turned over his cards. The 2 of hearts, the 5 of hearts, the 9 of hearts. He was laughing. He was already half out of the chair. The flush was face up on the felt. The room around the table made the little inhale that says, "Here it ends." I turned over my first card, the 7 of hearts. I turned over my second, the 7 of diamonds. The pause before the third card was where the trick lived. I lifted the third card off the felt by its edge and held it in front of Mike's eyes a quarter second longer than the moment called for. The card was a 9 of spades to the room. The card was a 9 of spades to Spike. The card was a 9 of spades to Mike, and Mike was already bracing for the disappointment of a small pair against a flush. I touched the surface of the card with the tip of my thumb and lifted the strand of hair off it. The 9 became a 7. The leopard ate the flush. Mike screamed. The room around the table erupted. The men on the empty stools came back toward the table. Slim, behind Mike, took a half step backward and put both hands flat on the wall behind him. Spike behind my chair made a noise like a man who has just remembered he is going to die tonight. I gathered the pot. I counted nothing. I dropped the bundles into Marcus's hands, and Marcus folded them into the inside of his own jacket without looking down. The deed was already in mine. The IOU was already torn. The $50,000 of casino money was on its way out the door with us. Mike was on his feet, both hands flat on the felt. He was shouting at me about the cards, about the deck, about the impossible. I let him. I stood up at the table with one hand on the back of my chair and looked at the two men who had been signaling. Spike's face was the color of paper. Slim was already against the wall. I addressed them in a voice low enough that the 4 nearest tables had to lean in to hear it, and loud enough that the words would be in every mouth in this casino by morning. Find someone decent to deliver the message next time. Everyone in this corner seems to be mistaking a 7 for a 9 tonight. I named them. I used the names everyone in this small town had used for them since the year they had come up from the city to do their cousin a favor. Spike, Slim. The room caught the word signaler. The room caught the word message. The room caught the way Mike's eyes went from me to Spike to Slim and back to me, and the way Mike's mouth, which had been about to scream at me again, closed. Spike whispered that he had not seen anything. Slim said in a voice not meant for the room that it was over, that it was all over, that they were going to be skinned. Up above us in this casino, on the 3rd floor behind the suit jacket guards I had been clocking the whole evening, sat the small piece of the Zane family gang that ran this venue. The same Zane family as the ones whose Ralph and Tiffany branch had bothered me at home in another decade. A signaler the kid in the corner had named to the room was a signaler the gang upstairs would not allow to walk out of this building. I did not need to lift a finger. Catherine was standing at the lone window across the floor. She had not moved during the reveal. She was watching me now with the small adjustment in her face turned all the way over. The deed in my pocket was hers an hour ago and was mine now. The 50,000 yuan in Marcus's jacket was her casino's money. She was not moving toward me. She was not moving away. She said 2 words across the floor in the same low tone she had used at the window. Adrian Lane. It was not a question. She was setting the name into a place in her head where she would find it again. I nodded once at her. I walked over to Ethan. I crouched by his chair. I took the 4 pieces of the IOU paper out of my pocket. I had picked them up at the lone window before I left the counter. I put the pieces in his hand. I closed his fingers around them. I told him, low, that the homestead was back. I told him that the savings he had lost tonight had been a tuition payment for a class that had finished. I told him that the price of the class had been $10,000 on the principal and $20,000 on the interest, and that he should keep the receipts in his shirt pocket for the rest of his life. He nodded. He could not speak. The weeping was not going to stop tonight. I did not need it to. Marcus pulled him up out of the chair. I led the 3 of us toward the back exit of the casino. The corridor that ran out behind the lone window past the kitchen toward the alley. The path the small town casino used when a man left with money it did not want to advertise leaving with. I knew the path because I had read its outline in the back of my head in the same heartbeat. I had bought the card sharping skill 36 hours ago. The night was waiting for us at the back end of it. Catherine was watching us walk out. The 3rd floor stair was watching us walk out. Mike, behind us, was still shouting at the felt. Spike and Slim were no longer in the room I could see in the side mirror over the bar. The German shepherds at the front entrance were not going to get a chance to see us leave tonight. We went out the back. The alley behind the casino was narrow and dark, and the moon was somewhere on the far side of a cloud. The dirt at the threshold was scuffed by the feet of men who had stood there earlier in the evening waiting for orders. The orders had already gone. The men were already further down the alley, already at the corners, already at the gate that opened onto the secluded path home. I had known that as I walked the corridor. Marcus had known it as he walked behind me. The 50,000 in his jacket and the deed in mine were the bait the path was about to bite at. I went into the alley without breaking stride. The first of the cannery's bicycle lights came around the corner of the alley a quarter second after my foot hit the dirt. A small, unexpected brightness. Marcus had sent 2 cannery men down to the casino corner before we sat at the table. They had come up the alley from the back. They were the answer to the path that was about to be the question. The trio of us went toward the corner where the secluded path opened. The night was very quiet. Somewhere ahead of us, on the secluded path, 12 men with pipes and a machete had heard the sound of a leopard's worth of pot being raked off a felt and had set themselves at the bend. I did not slow. The next bill was already on its way to me. We had come the wrong way out of the casino on purpose. The back exit had emptied us into the alley, and the alley had emptied us along the side wall to the front of the building, and the front of the building was where Catherine was waiting for us. She had come down from the balcony I had not known she had been watching from. She was leaning against the doorframe with one hand resting on the brass handle and a black leather suitcase set on the floor beside her shoe. She did not move when we came up to the door. She did not smile. She nodded once at me, the way she had nodded at the loan window after she said my name. She picked the suitcase up by the handle and held it out to Marcus. Marcus did not take it. He looked at me. I nodded. Marcus took the suitcase. The handle was cool brass. The leather was new. Catherine's voice was low. The summary of what she said was that the box was not designer, but it was the right size for cash, and the money from Mike's hand was inside, and there were not many young men in this small town who interested her, and that if I ever wanted a place to use what I had to use, I could come find her at this casino in the daytime and she would be at the bar. She said it in 3 sentences. She did not look at Ethan when she said it. She did not look at Marcus. Then she dropped her voice another half step. The summary of the second part was that Mike had already gone out the back, that there were probably men set on the path home, that she would send 4 of her own to walk us out of town if I wanted 4 of her own to walk us out of town. I thanked her. I told her some accounts were not convenient to settle inside the casino. I told her that outside, on the path, nobody cared. I told her I appreciated the suitcase. I told her I would think about the bar. Her mouth made the smallest turn at the corner. It was the closest thing I had seen to a smile on a cross face in either of my lifetimes. She stepped aside from the doorframe and let us out. As I walked past her, she put her hand on my left shoulder briefly. The pressure was the lightest thing the night had brought me. The hand came off before I cleared the threshold, and the door closed behind us with a soft click. The street outside was empty. Marcus carried the suitcase in his left hand. Ethan walked between Marcus and me. I steered the trio away from the main road and onto the dirt cut through that ran north between 2 cornfields toward the village. Marcus did not ask why. The cornfield was tall on both sides of the path. The leaves moved in the breeze, and the breeze sounded the same as men moving through corn. The moon was a quarter of itself. The path was the kind of path you take when you do not want to be on the road, and the kind of path you take when you do want to be ambushed. We had been walking for 10 minutes when Ethan finally said it. He had been silent the whole way out of town, and now he stopped on the path and turned to me, and the words came out in a low, ashamed rush. He told me he understood at last. He told me he saw the trick. He told me Spike and Slim had set him up from the beginning, that Mike had been waiting at the table for someone like him from the first day, that he had been an animal at the table and a tool in their hands and a danger to his wife and his parents and the homestead and his own brother. He told me he was going to remember the despair on the felt for the rest of his life. He told me about the layoffs at the construction bureau. He had not raised his voice on it, but I could hear him saying it for the first time. The state was going to thin the bureau. The men he worked with were going to be on the road inside a year. The reason he had been on the felt at all had been the future he had seen in the mirror at home. I told him to remember what he had said. I told him I had a use for him beyond the bureau and that we would talk about it when we got home. He nodded. Marcus said, "Lo, boss, There is a tail, I know. The tail had been on us since we left the casino. 3 men, then 4, then 6. Mike had pulled the rest in from the side roads. We were now 30 meters into the cornfield path with a dozen of them spread behind us and ahead of us, and the path was narrow enough at the bend that the dozen of them did not have to spread far to close. Mike stepped out from between 2 stalks ahead. He had a black cloth tied across the lower half of his face. He had a pickaxe handle in his right hand. The walnuts he had been clicking at the table were gone. He shouted from behind the cloth. The words were the words men shout when they want the night to think they are large. Stop. Hand it over. Robbery on the path. A dozen masked men came out of the corn behind him with pipes and machetes. Ethan moved. I want you to understand. He moved before I knew he was going to move. He stooped and picked up a half brick out of the side of the path, the way a man who has known a path for 30 years picks up a half brick. He stepped in front of me with the brick at his shoulder. He shouted at me to run. He shouted at Marcus to take me and the suitcase home. He shouted that the money in that case was the family's lifeline and that he was going to hold the dozen men off if it was the last thing he did. He had stepped in front of me, my older brother, in a body I had not seen do this since I was 6 years old. I put my hand on the back of his shirt. I did not let it stay there longer than the moment took. Drop the brick. Marcus is here. He looked at Marcus. Marcus had moved a step ahead of us on the path. Marcus had taken his hands out of his pockets for the first time tonight. The grin on Marcus's face was the only one I had seen on him in 36 hours of knowing him. It was a small grin, and it was not for anyone in the cornfield. It was for himself. He told me, quietly, that the boss had said he had to perform. He moved. I will not describe the next minute beat by beat. The men in the corn were a dozen rural toughs with farm tools who had run a small town casino's enforcement detail for 2 years. Marcus had been trained, in another part of his life, to remove from a building any number of armed men who had moved into it without permission. The math of the encounter resolved itself in under a minute the way mathematics resolves itself. He hit Mike in the stomach with a single punch. Mike went off his feet and into the corn behind him. He spun and put a boot into the side of Slim's face, and Slim went down and stayed down. He took the pickaxe handle from a man who had not yet fully gripped it and broke it across the same man's chest. He moved through the rest of them at a tempo that did not respect what they were used to. A minute passed, and the path was a quiet path again, with 12 men on the dirt. Ethan still had the brick at his shoulder. His mouth was open. He was not breathing. He whispered, of all things, that this was a man Marcus had been compared to in a story he had read as a boy. He said it like a child. The brick came down to his side. I crossed the path to where Mike was on his knees in the corn. I took the cloth off his face. The face under the cloth was already swelling on the left side. There was blood on his lip. The walnuts were gone for good. I slapped him once with my open hand, low and flat. The sound of it was small. Listen to me carefully. I slapped him a second time. I crouched in front of him with my elbow on my knee. I can pull 100,000 yuan out of my pocket. I can use 100,000 to buy your life. Tonight, I am not buying it. Tonight, I am letting you walk out of this cornfield. From now on, in this town, if you see anyone from the Lane family, you are going to take a different street. If there is a next time, the price will not be a few broken bones. He nodded so hard his head went into his knees. I stood up. I stepped past him. I walked back to where Spike and Slim were on the path. Slim was playing dead. Spike was not playing dead. Spike had been put out by the second of Marcus's hits and was lying with his face in the dirt and his arms over his head. Ethan was standing over Spike when I came up. He was looking down at Spike with an expression I had not seen on his face since we were small. He was not crying. He was not shouting. He was very still. He took a breath. He kicked Spike in the ribs. He kicked Spike again. He kicked him a third time and a fourth time, and he did not stop kicking him for what felt like 5 minutes. He cursed Spike with a vocabulary I had not known my older brother possessed. He told Spike what Spike had done to our family. He told Spike what would happen to Spike's mother if he ever saw Spike's face on a road in this county again. He kicked himself out of breath. He stood over Spike with his hands on his knees, panting. He looked at me. "Brother," he said. He could not look up. That was so satisfying. So satisfying. It was. We're going home now. I picked the suitcase up out of the dirt where Marcus had set it down before he had moved. I handed it back to Marcus. The trio formed up. We walked through the cornfield with the moon on the leaves and the path behind us emptying back into the silence it had been before we walked into it. The system chimed behind my eyes about a quarter of a kilometer past the bend. There was a small message in white. Reputation increased. Level 3. The mall refreshed. I opened the mall in my head while my legs kept walking on the dirt. The water and the meat and the card sharping skill were where they had been. Underneath them, 2 new lines had appeared. The first line was basic favor stickers, 10,000 yuan each. Invisible at the moment of contact, disposable. The description said the sticker added 50 units of favor on first contact with the target, enough to turn an indifferent stranger into a man inclined to do you a small favor. 10,000 yuan, a sticker, felt like too much for a piece of paper that did not exist. It was the cheapest thing I had ever seen in my life. I knew exactly what a 50-unit shift in a bureaucrat's first impression cost in the kind of office where I was about to spend the next 2 weeks. The second line was special supply premium cigarettes, 2,000 yuan a pack, refreshed daily. The description said the pack was a status marker. A man who took a cigarette out of one of these packs in front of a department head was a man who carried weight at the city level. The cigarettes were not for me. I did not smoke. The cigarettes were the door knocker. I bought 10 favor stickers. I bought 1 pack of premium cigarettes. The trust balance ticked down 102,000 yuan. The stickers did not appear in my hand or my jacket. The system said they sat in an inventory that materialized at the moment of contact. The pack I had to materialize. I took it out of the inside of my jacket and held it in my left hand. I thought about Marcus's mother. In the life I had just finished, she had not seen the autumn. The dialysis machine in the city had been a waiting list a kilometer long. The state transport captain whose desk you had to cross to get a sick rural woman onto the only available truck had been a man named Wright, and Wright had not let Marcus past his desk in that life or this. Wright had been the bottleneck on which Marcus's mother's name had been a piece of paper that did not move. The stickers were the answer to Wright's boss. The cigarettes were the answer to Wright's boss's first cigarette. I told Marcus, quietly, that his mother was going to a city hospital tomorrow morning. I told him the trip started at the state transport depot at the edge of town. I told him to be at my front gate at 5. Marcus did not say anything for a long step. Then he nodded. Ethan walked beside us with the brick in his fist. He had not put it down. He had brushed the dirt off it on his pants twice in the last quarter kilometer. He did not seem to know he was holding it. I did not tell him to drop it. I did not need to. The lights of the village came up over the rise of the road ahead of us. The lane to the homestead was a dirt cut to the right. The 2 cannery men I had set on the lane that morning were standing under the pear tree at the bend, with one of them holding a length of pipe at his hip and the other holding a kerosene lantern. They saw us, and the lantern lifted and the pipe went down. They did not ask anything. They did not need to. We went up the lane. The yard was dark. The kitchen window had a kerosene lamp burning low. My mother had left a bowl on the stove. The bowl would be cold. I stopped at the gate. I turned to Ethan. You go in first. You give the deed to our mother. You tell her you got it back from a man who was holding it for safekeeping. You do not tell her where it had been. You do not tell our father. You do not tell Owen. You do not tell anyone. Tomorrow, you go to the bureau and turn in your transfer paperwork. You are coming to work for the cannery in the morning. Ethan looked at me for a long count. Brother, the cannery. The cannery is mine. I bought it Wednesday. He did not know what to do with that sentence. He was already past the threshold of any sentence he could fit on his shoulders tonight. He nodded. He took the deed out of the inside of his shirt. He put the brick down at the foot of the gate. He went into the house. The first day after the cannery had taken 11 hours. The second day had taken 18. I sat down on the gate step in the dark and ate the bowl of porridge my mother had left. It was cold. The dipper in the side of it was the same dipper she had used since I was 4. I ate it slowly. When the bowl was empty, I set it down on the step and I sat for another minute in the dark, watching Marcus check the lane and watching the cannery men further down at the road. And I thought about Wright behind his desk in the morning and the first sticker going on to Director Howard's hand, the way a hand goes onto a shoulder. And I thought about the long queue of names ahead of mine on the ledger of the second life. The second day after the cannery was over, Marcus's mother went to the city in the morning. I went to bed. Marcus had been at my courtyard gate before sunrise, with the dew still on his shoulders. He had been there for 3 hours waiting for my front door to open. He did not say so. The shape of the dew on his shoulders said it for him. We met Curtis at the alley behind the state transport depot at 8:30. Curtis was Marcus's boyhood friend. 25. The kind of small, thin man who fades into a depot wall when there is shouting in the dispatch room. He told us, low, that the captain inside had spent his morning going up and down the line, telling every driver that no one from the Lane family was renting a truck today. The captain's name was Wright. He had taken a small payment from the man whose son had spent yesterday afternoon in a hospital bed, and who, in another time, was rolling decorative walnuts in his palm at his estate. Wright was at his desk in the dispatch room with a double happiness mug and 2 bored female employees on the bench against the wall and a cigarette burning at the corner of an ashtray. He looked at us when we walked in. He did not stand up. He took his time. He asked in the friendly voice of a man warming up to be unpleasant in front of an audience, what idle members of society wanted with state property at this hour. Marcus said his mother was on a Kang at home, dying of kidney failure. He said the man's car would save her. He offered double the standard charter rate. He said, please. Wright laughed. He told the room that all the cars were broken. He told Curtis that if Curtis touched a key today, he was looking for another job before lunch. I asked Wright once, in a voice I did not raise, if those were the rules he was following. He doubled the laugh. The female employees on the bench looked at the floor. I told Marcus and Curtis to walk out with me. At the dispatch room door, I turned and told Wright I hoped that when I came back through this door, the next time he would still have the capacity to speak to us in that tone. I closed the door behind us softly. The director's office was 2 doors down. The brass plate on the door said in characters I can give you in plain English, Director Howard, head of bureau. Howard was a man in his early 50s, in a charcoal cadre's jacket, reading the morning paper at his desk. I knocked once. He looked up. I apologized for the intrusion. I want you to understand the next minute the way a man on a chessboard understands a single move. I took the pack of Special Supply premium cigarettes out of my inner pocket and set it on his desk in front of him. Red box, small image of a city gate at the top, narrow gold trim along the edge. I told him a friend in the city had given me the pack and that I did not smoke, and would he do me the courtesy of accepting it. The pack sat on the desk between us. He looked at the pack. He looked at me. The shape of his mouth changed half a centimeter. The pack was the kind of pack a man at the city level smoked, and a man at his level did not see often. He invited me to sit. He pulled a cigarette out of the pack with the small reverence the pack invited. I leaned across the desk to light it for him with a match. As my hand brushed his elbow on the way past, the system ticked behind my eyes. Favor sticker deployed, plus 50 units on first contact, 10,000 yuan deducted from the mall budget. The sticker did not appear in my hand or his. It was less than a piece of paper. It was a small instruction the system wrote on the inside of his disposition toward me. The cigarette caught. I told him in 2 sentences that Captain Wright at his depot had refused a charter to ferry a man's dying mother to the city for dialysis and had used the Lane name as the reason. I did not raise my voice on the words. Howard's face went still. He put the cigarette down. He stood up. He picked the cigarette back up and walked out of his own office with it in his hand. Marcus and I followed him at a count of 10. Howard kicked the dispatch room door open without breaking stride. He told the room what Wright was. He used the words liar, parasite, embarrassment in front of the same 2 female employees. He told Wright that as of the moment he was speaking, the captaincy was no longer Wright's job, and that Wright was, from this hour, the depot's repairman until Howard's pleasure decided otherwise. Curtis, in the doorway behind us, let out a small, involuntary laugh. Wright was on his knees inside 30 seconds. Howard had security drag Wright out by the shoulder. I paid the charter fee for 3 months in cash on the spot. 3,600 yuan, 40 a day, 40 days a month, 3 months. I added an extra 1,500 for Curtis's bonus and stipend. Curtis stared at me as I counted it on the counter. Howard clapped me on the shoulder and told me his door was open any time of day or night. I had become, in the time it took a premium cigarette to burn an inch, a man with a stateside door that opened. Curtis drove the dark green transport truck up the road to Ice City. Marcus rode in the back with his mother on a thin foam pad. I sat in the front with Curtis. The road took 2 hours, and the ride was smoother than anything Marcus's mother had been on in 3 years. The nephrology department at the city hospital was full to the corridors. Whole families were sleeping on woven mats with their backs against the walls. The waiting list for dialysis was 50 names long. Marcus carried his mother in his arms past every one of them. I went to the head of department office. I knocked. Director Lewis was in his early 60s, white-haired, narrow gold-rimmed reading glasses, a stack of charts at his elbow. I introduced myself. I dropped Howard's name as a man who had told me to come see him. I set a fresh pack of premium cigarettes on his desk. Lewis read me. He read the cigarettes. He read Howard's name. He picked up the desk phone and gave the order down the corridor before he had said yes to me out loud. Marcus's mother went into the dialysis suite within the hour. Adrian deposited 3,000 yuan on the deluxe ward counter. 10 days. Private bathroom, dedicated caregiver, a window facing the inner garden. The deluxe ward was on the 4th floor and the window faced a small garden with a magnolia tree. Marcus carried his mother up to the ward. The caregiver helped him settle her against the pillow. Her face was the color of damp paper. She had not eaten anything that stayed in her body for 2 weeks. The caregiver opened the curtain on the magnolia tree. The mother saw the tree. She turned her head against the pillow. She looked at her son. She smiled. I have the smile in my head still. It was a small, tired, surprised smile, and it was the first smile her face had been able to make for a season. Marcus stood at the window for a long count without saying anything. He was facing the magnolia tree. His shoulders were not moving in any particular way. After a minute, he made a small sound through his nose. I left him to it. I walked down to the lobby alone. We ran into Eddie at the entrance of a video arcade 2 blocks from the hospital. He was in a floral shirt, loud enough to be heard from the next street, pretending to be the bouncer, half drunk by noon. He recognized me. He recognized a bigger man behind me he did not know. He demanded, in the friendly voice of a small relative claiming kinship, that since I was now a man of means, I owed him lunch. I invited him to the Oriental Grand Hotel. The Oriental was the most expensive restaurant in the city, a private room operation owned by a man known on the street as Fourth Master. I asked for the Penglai Pavilion. The Cheongsam hostess at the door bowed twice and led us up a stairway lined with red lacquer. Eddie ordered the most expensive items on the laminated menu without reading the prices. Australian lobster, Buddha jumps over the wall, whole abalone in clay pot, a bottle of Mao Tai, 2 bottles of Wuliangye. He wanted to be impressive. The hostess wrote it down without lifting her eyes. I tipped the hostess 100 yuan when she set the first dish down. I asked Marcus and Curtis to toast Eddie with the Mao Tai every 2 minutes. Eddie was a glass and a half drunk by the end of the first dish, and 3 glasses past awake by the end of the second. He fell forward into the abalone in the clay pot at the start of the third. The hostess's eyebrow went up 0.5 millimeter. She did not say anything. I stood up. I walked out of the Penglai Pavilion. I went down the stairway to the cashier's window. I told the man at the window in a steady voice that my older cousin was inside drinking and would settle the bill when he woke up. I gave the address as the Zane homestead in the village. The man at the window wrote it down and read me back the bill total, 2,200 yuan. He nodded. He did not need to say what was going to happen when Eddie woke up. The Oriental Hotel had a known protocol for diners who walked out on a bill. The protocol was a known city protocol. Fourth Master enforced it through his man at the door. The going rate was 1,000 yuan a finger. Marcus and Curtis followed me down the stairs. Curtis was humming. We went to the #1 department store on Central Avenue. I had 3 suits made. Dark blue for Marcus, black for myself, gray for Curtis. The fabric was the better of the 2 Italian wools the store stocked. Leather shoes, belts, 2 extra dress shirts each, plain ties. We crossed to the appliance aisle. I bought a Sony Trinitron color television, 29 inches, 15,000 yen. I counted out the cash on the counter, 2 bundles of 10 and 1 bundle of 5. Big Unity banknotes, still smelling of the system mint. The saleswoman wrote it up without raising her eyes. I bought a Siemens double-door refrigerator and a Little Swan front-loading washing machine and a goose-down comforter and a leather jacket for my father and a silk pillow for my mother and a small jade pin for my sister-in-law, Lillian. The young saleswoman at the appliance counter asked if we were filming a movie. I told her we were going home for dinner. The delivery address was the Lane Farmhouse, 3rd lane on the right, past the pear tree, beyond the village. Installation tomorrow morning at the start of shift. The TV was scheduled to arrive at 11 the next day on a separate truck. Curtis hummed a love song on the loading dock as the men loaded the dark green transport. Marcus did not hum. Marcus was watching the road. The truck rolled up to the courtyard gate at sunset. My mother came out wiping her hands on her apron, took one step onto the threshold, and stopped. My father came out behind her with the pipe in his teeth. Owen came out wiping the well water out of his hair. Ethan came around from the side of the house with a hammer in his hand he had been using on the chicken coop. My sister-in-law Lillian came out behind my mother in a thin cardigan with the down comforter package already in her arms before anyone had told her to take it. We unloaded. The washing machine went into the south room. The refrigerator went into the kitchen against the back wall. The down comforter went onto the Kong. The silk pillow went under my mother's hand. The leather jacket I draped on my father's chair without saying anything. The jade pin I pressed into Lillian's palm. My father stood at the courtyard wall with the pipe in his teeth and watched the men carry the boxes through the gate. He waited until the men had all gone back to the truck. Then he asked, in the voice he used when he wanted an answer without theater, where the money had come from. I told him the cover story I had been writing in my head since the morning. 3 sentences. I had old classmates in Beijing whose families had made money and were placing capital in the regions, while the regions were still cheap. I was the local face. The cannery was a real business, and the bottled water line was a real line, and there were real contracts and real bureau plates on the truck behind me. He looked at the truck. He saw the bureau plate. He chewed on the pipe. My mother put her hand on his arm and told him, in the soft voice she used to settle him at the table, that as long as it was not from anything illegal, she would consider it her son's capability. He was not satisfied. The family was. He did not press the question further tonight. I stood at the wall with Marcus as the truck pulled away. The sun was already gone behind the hill. Across the road, a tractor came up the lane at a slow pace and slowed again at the bend in front of our gate. The driver of the tractor did not get off. He looked at the truck. He looked at the boxes. He looked at the new washing machine my mother was already running her hand along through the south room window. The driver was Ralph. He pushed the tractor on. I watched the tractor disappear down the road toward the next homestead a quarter-kilometer east. Marcus had clocked the tractor before I had named it. He did not need to be told who Ralph was. The east room was loud. My mother was on the Kong with the down comforter still half folded around her, telling Owen for the 3rd time to stop opening and closing the refrigerator door. Owen was opening and closing the refrigerator door. The west room was quiet. I sat cross-legged on the Kong with a notebook and a pencil. Marcus was on a folding cot against the south wall. He had been quiet on the way home from the truck because he had been quiet on the way home from the Magnolia ward. He asked me, low, if I really meant to revive the dead cannery. I told him about the canned yellow peach line first. Marvin's old equipment was repairable with a budget I could fund overnight. The workers were already on the books. The orchards south of town would have peach trees and fruit by August. I told him about the bottled water line second. I told him whoever dominated bottled water in this country in the next decade would be on a list with 3 names on it. He looked at me as if I had said the moon was a fish. He nodded anyway. He had stopped second-guessing me at the door of the Magnolia ward. Ethan stood in the doorway with a cigarette in his mouth. He did not come into the room. He leaned against the doorframe and looked at the kerosene lamp on the table. I waited. He told me, eventually, that the construction bureau had not paid the salaries for 3 months, that his old friend on the team had quietly taken his years of service pay and left, that the rumors about layoffs had become the sound the men at the bureau made all afternoon over their tea. He told me he was scared. He told me he did not know how to be a man without the bureau. I laid it out for him in 3 sentences. I told him to go to the bureau in the morning and turn in his resignation while the lump sum subsidy for years of service was still on the books, before the layoff papers came down and the subsidy went with them. I told him to take the subsidy and a piece of my pocket and affiliate a private construction team with a state-owned umbrella, a yearly management fee, in exchange for the umbrella's name, which was the protocol the city was just learning to use. I told him to build toward a private real estate firm by the time the city's first wave of demolition contracts went out for tender. He stared at the lamp. Brother, he said. The word came out flat. Where is the affiliation fee going to come from? I am going to fund the affiliation. You are going to repay me out of the firm's first year of profit, no interest. I am paying because I want a partner, not a dependent. He looked at me for a long count. He took the cigarette out of his mouth. All right, he said. He pushed off the doorframe. I will resign in the morning. He went out. Marcus did not say anything from the cot. After a minute, he turned to face the wall. I want to give you the next part the way it came to me. Relayed at first light by the cannery foreman, whose wife's brother lived 2 doors down from the Zane homestead. Ralph had ridden the old tractor home from town, with Eddie folded in the back, Eddie's right hand wrapped in dirty gauze, and his shirt torn at the collar where the Oriental Hotel's enforcer had finished what the bill had started. Mother Zane had wailed on the Kong the whole way home about the 2,200 yuan she had been saving for the new TV. Ralph had told her to stop crying. Tiffany had been at the kitchen table eating sunflower seeds, and she had not gotten up to look at her brother's hand, because looking at her brother's hand would mean knowing things about her own afternoon at the cannery she had not decided to admit yet. Ralph had gone out and walked the village for 2 hours. He had come back with a piece of information. The Lane family had unloaded a truck full of high-end appliances at the courtyard at sunset, with a Sony Trinitron arriving in the morning. 20,000 yuan of goods, maybe 30. He had set down the teapot on the low table and laid out the plan. The plan, in the rural patriarchal mathematics of Ralph's head, was straightforward. The Lane family's wealth was visible. The Zane clan had numbers. The compensation was owed on Ralph's accounting, for Eddie's beating, for Tiffany's lost youth, for the wounded honor of the Zane name. He instructed Eddie to gather the elder uncle and the third uncle and every cousin in the morning before the Sony truck arrived. They would block the Lane gate. They would demand 30,000 yuan in cash. If the Lanes refused, they would smash the appliances. They divided the spoils across the table, the washing machine to Mother Zane, the refrigerator to Eddie, the TV to Tiffany. The foreman finished telling me this at first light at my courtyard gate. He told me he was sorry to wake me. He told me he had a wife and 3 children and could not afford to be the man who knew the Zane plan and did not say. I thanked him. I gave him 100 yuan he did not want and pressed it into his pocket. I told him to ride the bicycle to the cannery and to tell Marvin that 50 workers were needed at the Lane gate by noon today, with whatever each man could carry that was longer than his arm. I went back into the house. Marcus was already at the door with his coat on. The chimney was smoking when we rolled in. I had not seen it smoke in 30 years. In the life I had just finished, the cannery had stopped smoking the year I was 18 and had never started again. Today, it was a thin gray line going straight up out of the brick stack into the sky over the western half of town, and you could see it from the road 2 kilometers out. The yard had been cleared in 3 days. The weeds Marvin's men had been wading through last Wednesday were gone. The bricks at the workshop door had been swept. The painted slogan along the wall had been whitewashed, and the new red characters had not been painted yet, but the wall was waiting. Inside the bay doors, 3 production lines were running on test cycles, empty cans clattering through the seamers, the conveyor belts moving on their old rubber. Marvin met us at the office door. He was in the same gray Mao suit. The 3rd button was buttoned this time. He had slept 4 hours in the last 72, and his face had the look of a man who had not eaten enough, but who was not going to eat properly until the cannery did. He led me through the workshop. He showed me what was working. He told me the throughput problem had a name. The old factory had moved raw peaches through the gate on hand carts pulled by men, and the hand carts could not move enough fruit per day to keep 3 production lines fed. The lines were starving. The cans were sitting on the conveyor with nothing to put in them. I told Curtis to ride to the depot and rent 6 trucks from Howard at the same 40 a day charter rate, plus a 400 yuan per day stipend for each of the 6 drivers. The drivers were going to sleep at the cannery dormitory. The trucks were going to run between the orchards and the gate from sunup to sundown for the next 90 days. Curtis pocketed the order, climbed back into the dark green transport at the curb, and went. I sat down with Marvin at his desk. I told him the new policy: 8-hour day, 2 days off per week, a 50% wage hike on the rate every man had been making at the state-owned days, lunch in the workshop canteen, every man fed with meat, at least 1 meat dish every workday, free. Marvin's mouth opened. He started to tell me about the cost. I held up one hand. The cost is the cost. The brand is the brand. We are not building a sweatshop. We are building a name people remember in 5 years. The wage difference and the meat are the cheapest parts of the brand. He nodded slowly. He picked up his pen. He wrote the policy down on a piece of triplicate paper. I told him the price, $4.50 per can, the same as the established yellow peach brand the city sold under a name everyone knew. He looked up. The same. Brand parity, quality parity. We are not the cheap one. Then how do we move the first month's stock against a name everyone trusts? Buy one, get one free. For the first 30 days, every can priced at $4.50, and every customer who buys one gets a second one for nothing. Print that on the wrapper. He set the pen down. He looked at me for a long count. Boss Lin, the first month, that is selling at half. We will lose a fortune on the run. We will lose a fortune on the first month, and we will own the supermarket shelf in the second. The first month is the cost of the name. After the first month, every household in this prefecture has eaten our peaches, and the second can they buy is one they pay for. He nodded. He was not entirely persuaded. He picked the pen back up. I told him then, the longer thing, the thing I had not told anyone in this life yet. I told him about the supermarket chain I had been thinking about since I had been 40 years old. I told him about the model of the warehouse club store in another country, the one with the membership card and the bulk pallets. I told him about the model of the discount store with the founder's name and the rolling back the prices slogan. I told him I wanted 3 of them in this prefecture inside 5 years and 10 across the Northeast inside 10. And I told him the cannery was the supplier wedge that made the chain possible from day one, because the chain shelf would be stocked with our own canned goods at our own margin. He set the pen down a second time. He looked at me. He did not laugh. He did not nod. He said very slowly that he had not understood until this moment what the $4.50 pricing was. It is not the price, I said. It is the shelf. He picked the pen back up. Marvin called the workers to the workshop entrance at 3. I want you to understand who was standing in that half circle. These were the same 50 men whose pension book had been sitting in Marvin's drawer for the spring. They had been told in March that the state had no further use for them. They had spent the summer on a wall in front of the cannery gate watching the gate. They had watched a Hong Kong man walk the courtyard a week ago and tell their director the place was a wreck. They had watched the door close. They had watched a younger man come in 3 nights later with a stack of bills and tear the doors back open. They had been kowtowing in the dirt that night because the cannery was reopening with their pensions intact. They had not, until today, learned what it would feel like to actually work inside it again under a different rule. Marvin stood on the loading dock platform with the policy paper in his hand. He read it from the page. 8-hour day, 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. 2 days off per week, alternating. Wage rates raised by half over the state-owned book. A free midday meal in the canteen with 1 meat dish minimum every workday. Marvin held the paper up to show the seal at the bottom. Adrian's handwriting, in red ink, on the cannery's own letterhead. The half circle went quiet. I stood at the office window 2 stories above the platform. Marcus stood at my right shoulder. He had taken his hands out of his pockets. He was looking at the men. The first sound was a man in the second row breaking down. He was old and small, and he had been at the cannery 31 years. He sat down on the dirt of the courtyard and put his hands flat on his thighs, and the sound that came out of his face was not a sound a cannery worker is supposed to make in front of his colleagues. The man next to him put a hand on the back of his neck. Then they cheered. It was the second cheer the cannery had heard from these men in 7 days. The first one I had stayed at this same window for. I did the same thing I had done the first time. I did not go down. I did not raise the window to wave. I let Marvin do the going down, and I watched. Marcus said, "Low. Boss, they look like they could carry explosives right now." They could. We need them to carry pipes. He looked at me sideways. Tomorrow at noon. Marvin will know by tonight. I will tell him. He nodded. He went back to watching the men. I turned from the window and crossed the office and sat down on the corner of Marvin's desk, where the morning's papers were stacked. I waited for him to come back upstairs. He came up after 20 minutes with his face wet at the corners of the eyes. He did not say anything about it. He sat down at his desk. I pulled the bundle of 20,000 yuan out of my inside pocket and put it on his desk in front of him. He looked at the bundle. He looked at me. This is 20,000 yuan. It is for raw materials. You're taking a small team out tomorrow, 6 trucks and 8 men, and you are going to surrounding villages, and you are going to buy peaches. Large, unblemished, juicy. Every farmer you buy from, you pay 1 or 2 cents above market. You are not haggling. You are setting the price up. Boss Lin, that is, it is what the supplier network costs. The price is the wedge. The cannery will be the only buyer in the prefecture paying premium and same-day cash. The farmers who sell to us will be the loyal ones. Every farmer who comes to your truck once will come to your truck the second time. He nodded. There is one more thing. I pulled the spare notebook off his desk, the standard red and black cover, lined paper. the kind every cadre in this country carried in those years. You are going to keep a notebook. Every farmer you buy from, every one of them, you write his name down on a fresh page. You write his orchard size. You write his fruit quality. You write whether he tried to slip you a bad crate. The honest ones go in the front of the book. The dishonest ones go in the back. The front of the book is the supplier list. He took the notebook. Open it. He opened it. He uncapped the pen. Write a name on the first line of the first page. He looked at me. Old Tom, out by the orchard road south of town. He is the largest orchard owner in this prefecture. His peaches are the standard. You go to him first. You pay him 1 cent above what anyone else in this town has ever paid him. You ask his name and his wife's name and his father's name, and you write the lot of them in the notebook. He becomes the model for everyone else. Marvin had begun writing on the line before I had finished the sentence. The pen moved smoothly. The first name in the supplier ledger was the name I had remembered for 30 years. The orchard at the South Road, the peach trees in rows of 40, the old man with the wide canvas hat, and the hands so dry the skin cracked at the knuckles. He did not know yet. He was a name on the first line of a notebook nobody outside this office had read. He had 2 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days before a chainsaw started up at the south end of his orchard road. I would be at the cannery for most of those days, drinking tea with Marvin, reviewing the truckloads. I would not, in any of those days, mention the name out loud to anyone other than Marvin. I got up off the desk. I told Marvin the cannery would be sending 50 men to the lane gate at noon tomorrow with whatever each one of them could carry that was longer than his arm. I told him I would explain why over dinner if there was time. I told him I would expect him at the courtyard with the foreman by 10 in the morning, with the trucks, with the men. He stopped writing. He nodded. Boss Lin, the first time you came in this office, I thought you were a runner from a Beijing classmate. The second time you came in, I thought you were a small town boy with a strange amount of cash. Today, I understand. Today, I am running late. I pushed off the desk. Have the trucks at my courtyard gate by noon. I went downstairs and out across the yard. The chimney was still smoking. The men on the floor were already going back to the lines. A boy from the kitchen came out of the canteen door with a pail of water and a ladle. The first canteen meat lunch was tomorrow. The first peaches would land at the gate in 48 hours. The first boxes of finished cans would leave the cannery in 7 days. The first shelf in this prefecture would have our brand on it in 12. The second day after the cannery had been a long day. The third day was going to be longer. Marcus and I rode home in Curtis's truck. The sun was already low. The fields outside the road had the color the fields take when summer is starting to think about turning. I sat in the passenger seat with my elbow on the open window and watched the orchards we passed. There was a row of peach trees just past the second bridge. 20 trees, low canopy. None of them belonged to old Tom. His were further south. Curtis hummed. I went home for dinner. I want to give you the next part of the story the way it came to me, relayed by my mother and Owen. After the fact, sitting on the Kong in the south room with the Sony Trinitron silent at the wall and Owen's left arm in a sling. The Sony arrived at 11, the way the salesman had promised. 2 technicians from the city had a green ladder up against the wall before the truck driver had finished his cigarette. The antenna went up first. The TV came in through the courtyard gate on a felt blanket carried by 4 men. My mother had set a low wooden table against the south wall under a rectangle of red cloth she had borrowed from the cannery storeroom. The neighbors had been at the wall since the technicians had started. The whole village had come to watch. Owen was at the south wall in a leather jacket I had bought him at the #1 department store 2 days before. He had a peony cigarette in his teeth he did not know how to smoke, and he was telling Aunt Erhe from next door that the TV was 15,000 yuan in cash. Aunt Erhe was making the small sounds an envious woman makes when she has decided a piece of news will travel further than she will. The tractor came up the lane at 11:30. Ralph was at the wheel. Eddie was in the trailer with a strip of dirty bandage wrapped around his right hand and a butterfly of bruise across his cheek. Behind the tractor was a column of Zane men with shovels and pickaxe handles and pitchforks. 30, maybe 40, men of every age the Zane kin network could summon on a single morning. The the elder uncle, the third uncle, cousins who had never been to a Lane wedding. The whole western branch of the clan was on its feet. Ralph dismounted. He gave a speech. The shape of what he said was a thing he had been working on the night before. The summary was that the Lane family had set a trap for Honest Eddie at the most expensive restaurant in the city and run out on a 3,000 yuan bill the hotel's enforcers had collected from Eddie's right hand. That the Lane family owed the Zane clan 30,000 yuan in compensation for the bill, the beating, and the lost youth of his daughter. That if the Lane family did not produce the cash in the next minute, the Sony Trinitron, the refrigerator, and the washing machine were going to be smashed where they stood. And that any villager watching who held the Lane family above the Zane name was welcome to step forward and answer the same question. The crowd at the wall leaned in. Some of them were on the Lane side. Most of them, my mother told me later, were quietly hoping the Sony went over. Envy is a thing rural villages run on the way trains run on coal. Owen was at the south wall with the peony in his teeth. He took the peony out. He picked up a long-handled rake from the woodpile by the chicken coop. The rake was the rake we had used for the chicken bedding all my childhood. The teeth were dull and the handle was sticky. He stepped between the Sony and Ralph's column. He told Ralph that Eddie was a peeping Tom freeloader who had eaten his way through the Oriental on his own appetite, and that the bill on his hand was paid in the currency the Oriental traded in. He told Ralph that nobody from the Zane clan was going to put a finger on the Sony. The first man came at him. I was not there for what happened next. Owen took a pickaxe handle to the shoulder. He went down on one knee. He held the rake up. The second man kicked the rake out of his hand. He took a second handle to the back. He went down on the dirt of the courtyard. The technicians on the roof, 20 feet above, did not move. The crowd at the wall did not move. My mother stepped forward. My father caught her wrist. Lillian was at the kitchen door with both hands over her mouth. Ralph signaled his men toward the Sony. That is when the trucks came in. Curtis brought the lead truck in fast and turned it sideways across the courtyard gate. Marcus was on the running board. I was standing in the bed with one hand on the cab roof and a length of cane I had taken off the cannery loading dock in the other. The second truck was 40 seconds behind. Marvin at the wheel. 50 cannery workers in the back of the two trucks with wrenches, iron bars, lengths of pipe, and 1 or 2 PV hooks from the production line. I saw Owen on the dirt before I saw Ralph. I want you to understand the next 3 seconds. I had been a cold man in this courtyard a week ago when I walked past a body in another courtyard. I was a cold man at the casino when I read the cheat from across the room. I had been a cold man at the cornfield path when I slapped a swollen face. The thing that came up the back of my neck when I saw my older brother on the dirt with his mouth open was not cold. It was the only thing I had felt in this body that had nothing in it of the man I had been at 58. I jumped down off the truck. I told the workers behind me, I said it loud enough for everyone in the courtyard to hear, that any man who got off this truck and put his hands on a Zane today would be paid 300 yuan tonight, would have every medical bill of his covered if he was hurt, would have his family fed for a year if he went to jail. Then I told them, lower, that the man on the ground was my older brother. They came out of the trucks like a wave. Old Zeke from the canning floor came past me with an adjustable wrench the size of a small child. The boys from the seamer line had iron bars. Marvin himself, who had not thrown a punch in 20 years, sprinted at Eddie with a length of pipe. The Zane line broke inside 30 seconds. I did not run after Ralph. I let the workers take the courtyard. I watched, in the corner of my eye, Mr. Lane come around the side of the house with a wooden carrying pole. Behind him, in the south alley between the courtyard wall and the next homestead, Ethan and 7 engineers from the construction bureau came up the alley at a steady jog with shovels they had taken off the cannery dock when Marvin called them. The alley was the only exit out of our courtyard. Mr. Lane sealed the south end. Ethan's engineers sealed the lane corner. The 2 trucks sealed the gate. The Zane men ran. The workers herded them. Inside 2 minutes, 30-some men were trapped in the alley with no way through the south end and no way back to the gate. I crossed the courtyard. Ralph was on his knees in the dirt at the lip of the alley with his head down and his hands up. Eddie was somewhere further into the alley, face first in a puddle of last night's rain. Two cousins were curled around their stomachs against the south wall. I bent down. I picked up the cane I had set against the truck wheel. The cane was the old kind they used to use at the cannery to drive the seamer-lined dust out of the corners. 3 feet of varnished hardwood, a hooked handle, a worn grip, the kind of stick that knew what work was. I walked over to Ralph. I brought the cane down across the back of his shoulders. Once. He made a sound that was not a word. I did not raise the cane the second time. I crouched in front of him with the cane across my knees. Ralph, I have known your family for 30 years. I have a list in my head. He did not look at me. Every time your brother stole a goat from our courtyard. Every time your father took 2 yuan out of my mother's market basket. Every time your eldest cousin walked through our front gate to take a hen. Every time you sent Eddie to my brother's house to borrow money he did not give back. The list is not short. I want it back. All of it. Today. In this alley. He started to talk. I did not let him. Cash. Every yuan. From your house. The third uncle's house. The elder uncle's. Your eldest sons. You are going to send a cousin who can run right now, and they are going to bring the bag back to this alley before the lambs come off the spit tonight. You are going to write the names of every Zane man in this alley on a piece of paper, and you are going to sign your name in blood at the bottom of it. And the paper is going to say that no Zane will ever cross within a stone's throw of this gate again. You will repeat that to your dead grandmother in your dreams for the rest of your life. He was nodding before I finished the second sentence. Stand up. He stood up. His knees did not entirely take him. The cane in my hand told him to stand up the rest of the way, and he did. The cousin who could run, ran. The third uncle's leather money bag was at the alley mouth in 20 minutes. The bag was heavy. The bag was 30,000 yuan in big unity notes and another 5,000 in small bills. I counted nothing. Marvin counted it for me at the cannery later that night. The blood-signed paper was at my feet at noon. I let them out of the alley one at a time, single file, between Mr. Lane's pole and Ethan's shovels. The whole route was under 5 minutes from the moment Curtis had stopped the truck across the gate. Owen was bandaged at the head of the table. His left arm was in a sling Lillian had folded out of one of the new pillowcases. His lip was split. He was eating a piece of lamb shoulder with his right hand, and the lamb fat was running down his sleeve. He was smiling. He had not, my mother told me later, stopped smiling since the moment the trucks came in. I had set the long table out in the courtyard at 4. The lambs had been hauled in from the next village by a worker on a borrowed motorcycle and were turning on bamboo spits over a charcoal fire by 5. 100 caddies of pork from the cannery's butcher line came up at 6. 3 bottles of liquor for every one of the 50 workers came up with the pork. The wagyu was the last thing to come out. I had materialized it from the system mall in the cold storage room of the cannery on the way back to the courtyard at 4:30. A long tray of marbled beef, the color of red cherry wood with the white fat veined through it. The cannery cooks had grilled it on cast iron pans over the same charcoal fire as the lambs. The smell of it reached the road before the first villager dared come within 10 paces of the wall. The village stayed at the road. I sat at the head of the long table with my father at my right hand and Owen at my left and my mother across from me. Ethan was further down with the engineering team. 7 men in their 30s, water supply, structural, electrical, plumbing, eating and drinking the way men eat and drink when they have not eaten well in 3 years and have just been told they will eat well for the next 10. Marvin was at the worker end with a glass of liquor in his right hand, toasting every man down the line. I gave third uncle and fourth brother, relatives who had taken pickaxe handles for Owen in the first 90 seconds, 1,000 yuan each in cash. Third uncle wept on the table. Fourth brother nodded twice and pocketed the money. Curtis was humming a song I had heard him hum in the loading dock at the department store. Marcus was at the wall behind me with a glass of water in his hand. He had not eaten anything yet. The lamb came off the spits at 8. The pork was already half gone. The wagyu was the slowest to be eaten because the workers were not entirely sure what it was. Marvin walked the long table, telling each one to put a piece in his mouth and chew, and tell him whether he had ever eaten anything in his life that tasted like that. By the third worker's answer, the tray was empty. The village watched from the road. I looked at the road once. The villagers who had been at the courtyard wall in the morning, hoping the Sony went over, were standing in two clusters of women and a cluster of men, all of them silent, all of them watching the firelight on the marbled beef. None of them said anything to each other. The two pails of the lane gate were the brightest things on the road. Across the road, parked under the pear tree at the bend in the lane, a black Santana had pulled up at some point in the last hour without me noticing. I crossed the road with a black plastic bag in my left hand. Inside the bag was 2 pounds of snowflake beef, raw, unwrapped, the marbling so fine you could read the grain of the muscle through the white fat. The mall had given it to me at the same level 2 price I had been paying for the high-grade meat all month. The bag was a plain black plastic bag from the Lane kitchen, the kind my mother used for vegetable peelings. Catherine was in the back seat. She had been smoking thin, long cigarettes for the last hour. There were 3 white filters in the side ashtray. The driver, a man in a black collared shirt with the cuffs rolled to show forearms a bricklayer would envy, was at the wheel with both hands on the rim. He turned slightly when I came up to the window. He started to speak. Catherine waved one finger at him without looking. He stopped. I leaned at the window. I held the bag up. 2 pounds of snowflake beef from my freezer. Her mouth turned at the corner. She took the bag through the window. She felt the weight of the meat through the plastic. She set the bag on the seat beside her. You have been watching the play for some time. You have not bought a ticket, she laughed. It was a low laugh, 2 notes, the kind of laugh a woman makes when she has decided a man is exactly what she had hoped he would be. She paraphrased herself for what came next. The summary was that there was a banquet in Hong Kong 3 days from tonight, hosted by her father at a private gambling room above a cross-family hotel, that her father needed an outside skilled hand at the table because a man named Reed had been bleeding her family on the 2nd floor for some weeks, that she would like Adrian to be that hand, that the consultant fee was to be discussed, that the flight tomorrow would be paid, that she would meet him at the airport with her father and Hugo, and a second sister he had not yet met. I gave her the answer in 1 sentence. I told her her favor was worth more to me than her fee. She looked at me for a long count. She told the driver, low, in a sentence not entirely meant for me, that I was rich, that I was ruthless, that I knew how to win people's hearts, and that she was going to come back to this courtyard with a generous gift before the next visit. The driver started the engine. She raised the back seat window halfway. She looked at the bag of meat on the seat beside her. She looked at me through the half-open window. Tomorrow at 6, the airport. The Santana pulled away. I walked back across the road. The courtyard fire was still going. The lambs were down to the bone. Owen was telling the engineering team the story of the morning for what looked like the 3rd time. My father was on his feet at the head of the table with a glass in his hand. Ethan came up beside me at the gate. Brother, the Hong Kong woman. We are going to Hong Kong tomorrow morning. You are coming with me. I am registering a real estate company called Latitude. The engineering team is on payroll starting tonight. 1,000 yuan resettlement allowance each. Base salary 500 yuan a month. End of year dividend on every project. You can announce that to them tonight. He looked at the fire. Brother, what are we registering a Hong Kong company for? For the same reason I am crossing the road to give a casino daughter 2 pounds of beef in a vegetable bag. For the next door, the one after that, the rest of them. He nodded. He did not understand. He went back to the table and made the announcement to the engineering team. The 7 men stood up at the table and toasted him with the liquor. The fire cracked. My father raised his glass to me from the head of the table. I did not toast back. I lifted my own and held it level with his eye, and he saw what he needed to see. The day after the cannery had ended in a cane on a Zane back and a Wagyu tray on a long table and a black plastic bag through a Santana window. The Hong Kong door was open. The plane was at 6 in the morning. I went to bed with the smell of charcoal in my hair and the sound of the workers laughing at the table outside the window. We took the early flight to Hong Kong. Catherine's car had picked us up at the cannery yard at 4:30. Curtis had driven us as far as the airport perimeter and then turned the truck back. Marcus and Ethan and I had walked through the small VIP departure lounge with our boarding cards in our jacket pockets, and the Cross family had been at the far end of the lounge waiting at the gate the way a clan that owns half a city waits at a gate. Wallace was at the head of them. He had a black suit and a black silk shirt and a polished hardwood cane with a brass dragon's head at the top that he leaned on without needing to. Two men in matching gray suits stood half a step behind him on either side. They were the gambling masters Wallace had hired in the last month from a Cantonese house in Macau. They had the still hands of men who had spent a great many years on a felt table. Hugo was beside Wallace in a Versace shirt with the top 3 buttons open and a gold chain on his neck, thick enough to anchor a small boat. Emily was in a tailored cheongsam, dark hair pinned back, the kind of expression a woman wears when she is about to say something at a dinner table she has already decided is going to be funny. Catherine peeled off from us and went to her father. The thing they did next was a routine they had run on visitors from the mainland 1,000 times. Hugo started in on Ethan's faux leather briefcase. Emily started in on the cut of Ethan's suit. Wallace did not start in on anything. He simply did not look at me until he had decided the moment had come for me to be looked at. When he did look at me, the look was the look an established man gives a stranger he has decided is not going to be useful. He told Catherine, audibly enough that the entire lounge could hear, that she was to fly home to the cannery yard immediately. He told her the consultant had been a poor instinct. He told her Hong Kong was no place for a country boy, and that the country boy had been brought along to the family's embarrassment. Catherine answered him in a single sentence, I will not paraphrase, because it was not for me, and the family adjusted. I crossed to Wallace. I did not raise my voice. I told him, in 2 short sentences, that I was going to Hong Kong on my own business, a company to register, a building to inspect, and that his consultancy fee was a separate matter we could discuss later or never. Then I told him the second thing, the thing I had brought him to the lounge for. I told him that if his hired masters lost on the 2nd floor of the Hong Kong gambling den next week, he should not let them throw the first accusation. He should not let them claim cheating. He should require them to catch the cheat in the hand or eat the loss in silence. I named the man at the 2nd floor table by the name everyone in this part of the world used, Broken Hand Reed. I told Wallace that Reed's house had a rule for accusations that lost a finger and an extra fine besides, and that Wallace should make sure his masters knew it. Wallace did not laugh out loud. He smiled the way a man smiles at a child who has overheard adult conversation. He thanked me for the worry. He told me his masters had been at this trade longer than I had been alive. He told me to enjoy my flight. I told him I would. The gate opened. The 3 of us walked to it past the Cross family. Catherine fell in beside me at the door of the jetway. Her face was neutral. She did not say anything until we were through the door. My father is wrong about you, she said. He is not wrong yet. He will be. Kai Tak Airport made its famous turn at the runway approach, and Ethan had pressed his face to the window the whole way down. He did not say anything during the descent. He did not say anything at the gate. He carried the faux leather briefcase Hugo had mocked at the boarding lounge across one elbow as we came down the gangway. Hugo's Mercedes convoy met us at the curb. Hugo had decided in the air that we were going to be a comedy he could narrate to his cousins for the rest of the year. He told me, in a voice meant for the rest of the convoy, that Latitude real estate could not be registered in this town in one day. The waiting list was 7. The connections required were ones a country boy did not have. He invited me to sit in his car for the drive-in and watch how Hong Kong actually worked. I corrected him in 2 words. Big 4, he blinked. Deloitte, Bradley's office. We will be done by lunch. He laughed. He held the door of the Mercedes open with a flourish. I sat. Marcus sat behind me. Ethan sat beside Marcus. The convoy moved into central traffic. The Deloitte lobby was on the ground floor of a glass tower at the edge of Central. The marble was the kind of marble that costs more than a small country's annual revenue. The senior associates were attending Hugo on the way in, bowing to him, calling him by his given name, walking him toward the express elevators. The lobby manager waved my group off toward the side reception. He did not look at me directly. He had decided, at one glance, who was the client. A young employee at the side reception desk did look at me. Sophia was 22, wearing a beige blouse with the sleeves rolled and shoes she had been wearing for too long to still polish. She had not been promoted to the senior reception. She had been moved out to the side desk because the firm needed the senior reception to be looking at Hugo this morning. She rose when our group came up. She asked, in clear, careful English, what she could help me with. I asked her to verify the funds on a card. I gave her the card. She looked at it. The card was matte black with a small horizontal HSBC logo embossed in silver and no number on the front. She turned it over. She looked at me. Right away, Mr. Lane. Adrian Lane. She walked behind the partition with the card. 2 minutes passed. Hugo, 20 meters across the lobby, was still being walked toward the elevators. Sophia came back across the marble at a run. I want you to understand the next 90 seconds. The senior partner of Deloitte's Asia-Pacific operations does not, on most mornings, descend in the executive elevator. On this morning, Mr. Bradley descended. The elevator chimed. He came across the marble at a measured walk, and he bowed at the waist, the full 90 degrees, in the doorway of the elevator. He apologized for the lobby's confusion. He invited my group up. He walked past Hugo without acknowledging Hugo. The lobby manager, who had waved my group off, was holding the elevator button down with a finger that had not stopped trembling. Hugo had stopped where he stood, with his mouth slightly open and his hand still on the elevator handle that no one was using. I waved at Hugo on the way past. He did not wave back. Bradley served tea himself. He set the portfolio in front of me. The portfolio was a list of pre-registered shell companies Deloitte held for clients who needed to incorporate quickly. 3 of the first 4 were Cayman-based structures with names already on file. 2 of those would not survive the kind of dispute I knew. From 30 years of memory, the next decade was going to bring across the financial services bar. I browsed past the first 3. I read the 4th. Cayman International Construction Holdings Group. Registration fee, 500,000 Hong Kong dollars. Pre-cleared paper, ready to operate within the day. I told Bradley I would take it. I told him the rename, Latitude Real Estate Group. I told him, only loud enough for him and Sophia to hear, that the Cayman base provided the legal protection my position required. He took the rename without question. I told Sophia that I needed her to handle the registration paperwork, the title transfer for the building we were about to purchase, and the corporate account at HSBC. She did not move. Bradley turned to her at his elbow. He told her, in front of me, that her grade was being adjusted as of this hour. She would be promoted to lead lawyer on the Latitude account, with priority resource allocation, with a seat at the partner track table on her next review. She bowed. I told her, calmly, that if I said she could do it, she could do it. I told her that when she chose to leave Deloitte to start her own firm, I would be her angel investor for the first round. She said yes. Sophia met us at the curb 3 hours later with a key. The Admiralty building had 33 stories. The blue glass curtain walls reflected Victoria Harbor twice over. The previous owner had been an English family who had emigrated to Canada the year before and had been quietly trying to liquidate the asset since. The asking price had been 220 million Hong Kong dollars. Sophia had brought it down to 200 million on the same afternoon by walking the title search out of Deloitte's records department and pointing at 3 small encumbrances Sophia had cleared on the morning shift. I bought the building. The wire transfer cleared at 3 o'clock. The Latitude sign, gold foil and neon, 20 meters across, was being raised onto the top of the tower as we stood at the curb. Ethan stared up at the building. He dropped his hat. He picked it up. He put it back on. Brother, he said, we are buying the whole, all of it. Top 3 floors are headquarters. The other 30 are leased to multinationals and law firms. Sophia handles the leases starting next week. He stared at the building for another long count. We went up to the 33rd floor. The English family had left the floor furnished, and they had left a wine cabinet against the south wall with 20 bottles of red still in it. Late at night, the 3 of us drank the English family's wine. Marcus had 2 glasses and stopped. Ethan had 3 glasses and started a 4th. The harbor was lit up on 3 sides of the windows. Adrian Lane Limited and Latitude Real Estate Group on a sign across the city. The day had been the longest day in this body in either of my 2 lives. I sat on the leather sofa and watched the Admiralty traffic move along the street 8 floors below. Ethan put his glass down. He looked at me. He looked at the city. He looked at me again. He asked the question I had been waiting for him to ask since the truckload had pulled into the courtyard a week ago. He asked me where the money had come from. I opened my mouth to answer. The system chimed behind my eyes. I want to tell you what happened in the next breath. I had not asked it to do this. I had not invited it. The system opened a small thread of explanation and put it into the soft place inside my older brother's understanding before I had said the first syllable of whatever I had been about to say. The thread told Ethan a story that was not true. The story said I was a white glove frontman for powerful figures in Beijing who could not have their names on Hong Kong title deeds. that the wealth on the building was not mine, that I was the local face for it, that my position carried risk. Ethan heard the new story. He did not hear the old one. I had not yet spoken. Tears came up in his eyes. He stood up out of the chair. He came across the carpet and he set both hands on my shoulders and he told me, in a voice that broke on the second sentence, that from this hour his life was mine and that he would protect his frontman younger brother from whatever the men in Beijing were going to send to collect. I did not stop him. I want you to understand that part of the night. I let the system's lie sit inside my older brother's head. I told him to keep the cover secret. I did not say to him no. I did not say to him, brother, the truth is older and worse and crosses the corridor of a Beijing hospital room you have not seen yet. I let him hold the lie because the lie made him useful and the truth would have made him afraid in a way I was not ready to be afraid in front of him. Marcus, in the chair on the other side of the coffee table, did not say anything. He had read me. He had read Ethan. He had read what the system had done. He drank the rest of his glass slowly and put the glass down, and he did not. When his eyes met mine over the rim, look at me with anything I would have called approval. The harbor kept moving below the window. In the morning, Sophia brought 3 resumes. I read the top one. Carter, 38, Cambridge graduate, formerly deputy director of the Asia Pacific Real Estate Division at a firm called Jardine Matheson. He had left the firm 2 months ago over a disagreement about the firm's Southern China strategy. He had been on Sophia's network's quiet list since. I told her to call him before lunch. He arrived at 1. He was tall, narrow, polite. He had a black notebook open on the desk between us before he had finished sitting down. I made the offer in 2 sentences. 500,000 Hong Kong dollars a year as Latitude's chief operating executive, plus year-end bonus on profit, plus a piece of every project he closed that Latitude would not have closed without him. He accepted in 2 sentences. I told Sophia, after Carter had left, that I needed the best private security firm in Hong Kong by tomorrow morning. We were going to a particular gambling den off Wan Chai tomorrow evening. I told her the name of the den. Her eyes widened a 1/4 inch. She nodded. She made the call. Ethan was at the south window with his back to me. He had not turned since he had heard the security firm request. He was looking at the harbor with a hand at his temple. Brother, he said, we are going to be in that building for 1 night. Catherine's father and her brother have been losing money there for a month. I'm going to win some of it back. He did not answer. The Hong Kong sun came up over the windows of the Admiralty building. Across the harbor, in a quieter corner of Wan Chai, Reed was waking up to the news that a new mainland boy had bought a glass tower in Central overnight. The next bill on the list was him. I had 4 hours to find the right tie. The 3rd evening in Hong Kong, I took Catherine to dinner. The Atlantic Hotel had a small rooftop garden the management used for 2 cover anniversary tables and the occasional political handshake. The candlelit table at the railing was reserved for me by Sophia, who had called the restaurant herself an hour earlier and asked the matron not to see anyone within 10 meters of us. I had ordered the steamed cod, the grilled lobster, the asparagus and butter, and a bottle of a French white I knew Catherine had liked the year before in another life. Catherine arrived in a high-collared dark green silk blouse over a charcoal pencil skirt with a small Cartier watch on her wrist. The watch ticked past 6. The cod cooled on the plate. She was poking at a piece of fish she had not eaten. She looked up and apologized for daydreaming. She had heard from her family's dispatcher that her father had taken the 2nd floor of the West Street restaurant at 3 this afternoon. Wallace had brought 3 million HKD in cash, 2 hired masters, and an iron balls grip he had been working on for a week. The first dispatch said the cash was already gone, and the iron balls were not enough. I set my glass down. They have brought charlatans to a butcher. The bill is going to be much larger than 3 million. She did not say anything for a long count. I will come with you. She lifted her face. The Cartier ticked past 6:15. You owe my father nothing. I am not coming for your father. I am coming for you. I would like to eat at this table again under different circumstances. We will eat at this table tomorrow. She laid her napkin down. We left the cod on the plate. The West Street restaurant was a casino with a name that was not a casino name. The ground floor was the public side. 100 slot machines along the south wall, 20 pinball machines under a thick cloud of cigarette smoke, 60 dice tables along the open hall, 400 customers at any moment of the evening. The staircase to the 2nd floor was at the back wall, and the 2 heavies at its foot wore dark suits with the lapels cut to hide a holster. The second floor was, the door manager told me as I came in, by invitation only. I came in past the door manager in a black trench coat over the black suit Sophia had picked up for me at noon. Catherine was on my arm. Marcus was a step behind. Sophia had hired the security firm, and they were 2 cars across the street watching the building. The door manager read the trench coat as money, the way the Deloitte lobby manager had read it as money the morning before. He waved us through. Catherine's hand on my arm tightened. We took a dice table at the south wall. The dealer was a thin man in a red satin vest who looked up from his shaker, registered the trench coat and Catherine on my arm, and started sweating before I had picked up the first chip. I bought a tray of 10,000 HKD chips. I want you to understand the math of the next 10 minutes. The dice game on the table was Sickbo. The shaker held 3 dice. The bets a player could lay were 100 different combinations. The lowest odds bet was a single number. The highest odds bet was full circle. All 3 dice showing the same number, any number, at 24 to 1. I bet 200,000 on full circle. The dealer shook. The dealer set the cup down. The dealer's right thumb pressed under the lip of the table. The cheat mechanism was an electromagnet under the felt that pulled a small steel core in one of the 3 dice and skewed the roll. I had been on this kind of table in another life, and I had been a man who paid for cheat mechanisms in another life, and the system was reading the press of the dealer's thumb on the underside of the table the way a man reads a newspaper. I tapped the felt twice. The mechanism failed. The cup came up. 3 2s. 5 million HKD on the felt in front of me from a single roll. The crowd around the table thickened. I bet again. Leopard 6, 3 6s, 24 to 1. I shoved 1 million on the line. The dealer's thumb pressed. The thumb did not catch. I tapped the felt twice. The cup came up. 3 6s, 24 million. The crowd doubled around the table. Other gamblers, drunk on the run, started laying their own chips on whatever I was laying mine on. 3 of them won mortgage down payment money in the next 2 minutes. The hall was on its feet. The dealer was wiping his face with a handkerchief that was not absorbing anything anymore. I cashed out at 25 million HKD. 5 of it was mine. The rest was the casino's lost margin to the gamblers who had followed. A henchman by the staircase ran up the stairs. I drew Catherine closer to my side. Marcus moved to my left. The thin neon over the staircase did not quite reach the landing. I waited. Reed came down the staircase first. He was in his early 40s. He was short and stocky, and his face was the face of a man who had spent 2 decades in a back room with the door closed. He wore a charcoal gray 3-piece suit and a wide pinky ring on the left hand. His right hand had a small visible bend at the second knuckle from a fight he had lost 10 years before. The bend was where the street name had come from. He came down the staircase clapping with one hand against his thigh in the local rhythm that meant murderous aura, but disguised as applause. Behind him on the staircase was a smaller man, lean, narrow-shouldered, in a black-collared shirt with the sleeves rolled. The man held the second-floor landing while Reed descended. He did not look at the floor or at Reed. He looked at the staircase. Marcus's eye flicked once to the smaller man and tracked him for the rest of the evening. Phantom. Behind Phantom, helped by 2 other men of Reed's, came the Cross family. I want to give you what I saw in the order I saw it. Wallace was first. He was gray-faced. He was holding 2 iron balls in his left hand, and the iron balls were rolling against each other in a way that did not entirely conceal that his hand was shaking. Hugo was second, on his feet, but not entirely upright, leaning on Emily's shoulder. Emily was third, in the green cheongsam from this morning's airport with a tear at the hem from somewhere on the second floor. Wallace's 2 hired masters were not with him. The first one, the ghost hand master, had attempted a hidden sleeve cheat earlier and had been caught by Reed at the catch the cheater rule the West Street enforced. The cost the master paid was permanent, and the master was no longer at the table. Wallace's second master, the thousand-faced Buddha, had then lost the family's 3 million plus another 6 in a Texas Hold'em hand under a signaler routine he had not read in time. Hugo's eyes came up and found mine. I want you to understand the next 4 seconds. I had been at the airport gate 12 hours ago when Hugo had mocked Ethan's briefcase, and Wallace had thanked me for my worry about Reed and told me to enjoy my flight. I had spent the morning in the Deloitte lobby with the manager who had waved me off toward the side reception. I had not been registered in any of those rooms as a man. Hugo registered me in this room. The recognition came up his face the way a wave comes up a beach. He whispered something to Emily. Emily whispered something something to Wallace. Wallace's iron ball hand stopped rolling. He looked at me for the first time in his life with full attention. Reed crossed the hall to my table. He congratulated me, in broken Cantonese accented Mandarin, on my luck. He said the view was much better from the second floor. He invited me up. Hugo, behind him, called out from the floor that I was a country bumpkin and that whatever cheap tricks I had brought from the mainland were about to get exposed. I told Hugo to keep his eyes open. I told Reed I would come up. Catherine's hand on my arm went rigid. She started to say something. I did not let her. I walked across the hall toward the staircase with Marcus a step behind. The two heavies at the foot of the staircase moved aside. I climbed. The second floor room was smaller than I had expected. One round table at the center under a low lamp. Dark green felt, a leather couch on the south wall where the Cross family was directed. Two of Reed's apprentices stood behind Reed's chair on either side, both in the same dark suit and the same flat expression. Phantom held the door. Reed sat across from me. He proposed Texas Hold'em, the variant where each player held 3 cards. 100,000 HKD ante, no limit. I accepted. The chips on the table totaled to 45 million. The 5 million from downstairs was at my left hand. I want to give you the first hand the way I played it. Reed dealt. My hole cards were a 3 of hearts and an 8 of clubs, and a flop of nothing useful. I folded. Hugo sneered from the couch. Second hand. I called the ante, raised on the flop into a flush I could not have made, and folded on the river. Hugo laughed. Third hand. Hole cards were a king of hearts and a king of spades, and a small card I did not need. I went all in. Reed turned over a straight on the river. The 5 million was gone in 20 minutes. Catherine was at the back of the couch with both hands at her mouth. Wallace had not made a sound. Emily was holding Hugo's arm tight enough to bruise it. I sat with my hands flat on the felt for a long count. I let my shoulders drop. I let my breath shorten. I let the face I was wearing red as a face that had just lost everything. I stood up. I slammed both hands flat on the felt. I told Reed in a voice I roughened at the edge that he was a cheating Hong Kong charlatan and he had cheated me out of $5 million, and I was going to have a piece of him before this room ended tonight. Reed sat back. He did not say anything. He waited. I reached into the inside pocket of the trench coat. I took out a single piece of paper. I slammed the paper down on the felt face up. A bearer draft, HSBC, 30 million Hong Kong dollars, signed for the bearer, payable on demand at any HSBC counter in the territory. The room went quiet. Reed lifted the draft. He held it up to the light. He passed it sideways to the casino's manager, who had appeared at his elbow without making a sound. The manager took it out of the room. He came back inside 90 seconds and nodded once. The draft cleared. Reed turned back to me. He told me in the same broken Mandarin that the casino was happy to refresh the chip racks. He motioned to the apprentices. The apprentices reset the table. The chips on the felt were now 35 million on my side. Behind me on the couch, Hugo was whispering to Wallace. I did not need to listen to the words. I knew what Hugo was saying because Hugo was a man whose understanding of a man richer than him moved along a single track. He was telling his father that the only kind of man who slammed a 30 million HKD HSBC bearer draft on a Reed table at the rage end of a 5 million loss was a Beijing dynasty princeling's white glove agent risking other people's money. Hugo was telling Wallace that the cover story Adrian carried was the cover story Adrian had been carrying since the morning at Deloitte, and that the warning at the airport had been the warning of a man who was not what he had appeared to be. The cover the system had built around Ethan was now sitting unsupervised inside Hugo's understanding too. I let it sit there. Catherine stepped down from the couch and came to my elbow. Her face was pale. She was reading the trembling of my hand on the felt. The hand was deliberately trembling in the rhythm A deserve trembles, and reading my bloodshot eyes, which I had been working at since the third hand. She believed I was sacrificing myself for her family. She was touched. She was terrified. She did not know it was performance. I told her, low, that she should sit down. She sat down. She did not let go of my sleeve. Reed dealt the next hand. The cards came down on the felt, and the chips slid into the middle, and the room held its breath. The night was loaded for tomorrow. The Cross family read me as their salvation arriving in disguise. Reed read me as a desperate young man who had just made the mistake that would be the last mistake of his weekend in Hong Kong. Catherine read me as a man losing his employer's money for her sake. Marcus, at my left shoulder, read me as the man he had been hired to read. He did not move and he did not say anything, and he did not when his eyes met mine across the table once between hands. Look at me with anything I would have called approval. I looked at Reed across the table. The light from the brass-shaded lamp caught the bend in his right pinky. His mouth turned at the corner. He smiled. The trap closed around the smile. The chips on the table reset. I let Reed deal the next hand and watched what came out of the deck. The whole cards came down in front of each of the 4 players who had stayed at the table when the apprentices had reset the racks. Reed got a pair of queens. 2 other Hong Kong men got middling hands. Phantom, Reed's enforcer who had moved from the door to the second seat at Reed's right, got what the apprentices behind Reed had pre-shaped for him. A king of spades, a 6 of spades, and a small card I read as a low spade, a king spades flush in the making. I went all in for 10 million on the first round. Reed folded his pair of queens. The 2 Hong Kong men folded. Phantom did not fold. Phantom did not have any money in front of him. The apprentices had given him the hand, not the chips. He sat at the table and grinned at me and proposed in the casino's broken Cantonese that he was good for the call. He would wager his life on the hand. 3 million HKD on his head. Casino rule compliant. I agreed. He turned over his cards. I want to give you what the table saw. The first card was a 6 of spades. The second card was the small card, which came up an 8 of spades. The third card was a 2 of hearts. The flush was a low pair. I turned over my own cards, 3 aces, a pair of kings, a full house at the top of the deck. The room around the table did the small inhale that says here it ends. The catch the cheater rule activated. The apprentices behind Reed had set the king of spades on Phantom's third card. The king of spades was no longer there. The casino's verification under the rule transferred Phantom's wagered life to me. I offered Reed the chance to redeem Phantom for 3 million in cash. Reed did not look at Phantom. He shook his head. The pride in him would not pay 3 million for an apprentice's failed gambit. Phantom understood in the second after Reed's head shake that Reed had let go of him. He cursed Reed in the local syllables. He came up out of the chair at me with his hand reaching across the table. Marcus moved between us. The wager was the wager. The casino's rule applied. Marcus's strike ended the threat. The body lay still on the floor of the room. The cocktail glasses on the side table did not rattle. I sat back down at the table. Reed had not moved. The 2 Hong Kong men had not moved. Wallace, on the leather couch, had not moved. The room around the table held the silence the way a man holds a glass when he does not know whether to drink. I asked Reed to deal the next hand. I proposed a new ante, 1 million HKD a hand, no limit. Reed agreed because he could not back down without losing more face on top of an enforcer's body still warm. I took the deck, the first hand. I dealt Reed his 3 cards and dealt myself my 3. Reed turned the corners up to read his hole. He had a 4 of diamonds, a 7 of spades, an 8 of clubs. In the local Cantonese, the numerals 478, read in sequence, are the syllables for the phrase that means go and die. Reed's eye twitched. He folded. I raked the pot. The second hand, I dealt again. Reed read his hole, a 4 of hearts, a 7 of diamonds, an 8 of diamonds, 478. He folded. I raked the pot. The third hand, I dealt. Reed read, a 4 of clubs, a 7 of hearts, an 8 of spades, 478. He folded. I raked the pot. I want you to understand the small smile I was wearing between hands. I let Reed catch it. I let Wallace and Hugo and Emily catch it. I leaned on my elbow and I told the table, in the local Cantonese the way it sounded on the second floor of the West Street restaurant, that 478 read also as 748, which read as the phrase for go and die in this neighborhood, and that my friend across the table was getting the same hand 3 times in a row, and that perhaps the universe was telling him something about his evening. Hugo, in the corner, burst out laughing in spite of himself. Wallace silenced him with a look. Catherine, at the back of the couch, did not laugh. Her shoulders shifted half an inch under the blouse. Reed's face had gone the color of the back of a cigarette card. He stood up. He told me, in a voice that scraped, that he would deal the fourth hand. He took the deck out of my hand. The two apprentices behind him moved a half step closer to the chair. I let him have the deck. Reed shuffled. He shuffled the deck 3 times. He cut the deck. He laid the cards down on the felt. I picked my own whole cards up. I held them up to read them. The cards did not matter. I had not come up to the second floor to win the hand on the cards. Across the table from Reed, I made a movement with my left hand. I want you to understand the movement. It was a clumsy left-hand sleeve motion of the kind a beginning card sharper makes when he is trying to slide a card up his cuff and has not yet worked the muscle out enough to do it without showing the move. I let Reed see it. I let the apprentices behind Reed see it. I let the table see it. I made the move twice, deliberately, the second time slower than the first. Reed's apprentice on the left screamed it. The accusation came out in the broken Cantonese the casino used for its rule pronouncements. 3 cards in the suspect's left sleeve. Catch the cheater rule active. Verify by search. The casino's manager appeared at the door. The 2 heavies from the staircase moved up to the table. The rule was the rule. If the cheating was real, I forfeited a hand and double the bet. If the cheating was false, if the search came up clean, the accuser paid double the bet and forfeited 2 hands. Reed was openly grinning. He stood up and conducted the search himself. He patted my left arm. He turned my cuff up to the elbow. He searched my right sleeve. He searched the inside of my trench coat. He searched both pockets. The 2 heavies counted the deck. The deck came up exactly 52 cards. Reed counted the deck himself. 52. There was nothing in my sleeve. The room knew before Reed's face did. The Hong Kong men at the side tables had stood up. Wallace had not moved. Catherine was leaning forward. Hugo's mouth was open. Reed counted the deck a 3rd time. 52. The casino's manager spoke the verdict. The accuser had cried false. The catch the cheater rule applied to Reed. Double the bet, 20 million HKD. The original 5 million from the first round had to be returned. The apprentice who had screamed the accusation forfeited his 2 hands. Reed himself, as the accuser of record, forfeited a hand of his own under the rule's accuser doubled clause. Reed went the color of paper. I want you to know what I asked for. I told the manager I would accept the money in lieu of the hands. 10 million HKD in cash, plus the recovered 5 million from the first round, plus the cross-family IOU paper Reed had taken from Wallace earlier in the evening, plus the principal of 3 million the Cross family had brought in. That was 18 million HKD plus the IOU. Reed's apprentices kept their hands. Reed kept his hand. The manager nodded twice. Reed signed the payout. He signed the IOU back over with a hand that no longer entirely worked. The casino paid out the cash from its own vault. Reed would settle with the casino in the morning. The IOU pieces, signed in Wallace's blood, were folded onto the felt in front of me. The leather case of US dollar bills was set down beside them. I rose. I crossed the second floor room with the leather case in one hand and the IOU pieces in the other. Catherine had stood up from the back of the couch. She came to the front of it as I came across. Wallace, beside her, had stood up too. He had stood up as the manager spoke the verdict. Hugo was on his feet behind Wallace. Emily was on her feet behind Hugo. I did not stop in front of Wallace. I stopped in front of Catherine. I put the leather case in her left hand. I put the IOU pieces in her right hand. I told her, in a voice I let the room hear because Wallace needed to hear it, that what was money compared to friends. Wallace did not say anything for a long count. Then he bowed. He was a man who had not bowed in this lifetime to anyone outside his own father. He bowed at the waist, the full 90 degrees, the way Mr. Bradley had bowed to me on the marble of the Deloitte lobby 2 days before. Hugo, behind him, dropped to one knee and pledged the words an old Hong Kong son pledges when he has decided which house his loyalty has just become attached to. The summary of what Hugo said, paraphrased, was that I, Adrian Lane, had today saved the Cross family, that he would call me Brother Adrian for the rest of his life, that anything I asked of his father's house would be his father's house's first instinct to give. Wallace did not stop the pledge. Emily, behind Hugo, came around the couch and rose on her toes and kissed me on the cheek. She told me she had decided in the last 20 minutes that she would also like to be friends. Catherine cut at her sister with one sentence. I will not paraphrase boundaries here, because the Cantonese it was in was not for me. Emily laughed. She did not move away. I filed the moment without comment. I pocketed the IOU pieces in Catherine's hand again, gently, after she had read them. I told Wallace, calmly, that I would see him at the airport in the morning. I led Marcus and Catherine out of the second-floor room. Reed, at the table, was sitting in his chair and looking at the deck. He did not look up as we passed. The two heavies at the staircase parted for us. We came down to the first floor. The casino's first-floor crowd was thin now. Late night, mortgage down payment money already gone home in pockets. We crossed the floor and went out into the harbor air. The black Mercedes from Adrian's hotel was at the curb. Wallace's convoy was at the airport in the morning. Two black Mercedes-Benz sedans were parked beside the convoy. The cars were the Tigerhead model, the only foreign sedan in the territory this season. Wallace gave me the keys to both himself. He told me, calmly, that I had saved his face and tens of millions of his money the night before, and that the cars were nothing. I accepted the keys. I tossed the second set to Carter, who had flown over from Latitude that morning to make the trip back with us. Catherine kissed her father's cheek and stepped onto the boarding ramp behind me. Hugo bowed once at the foot of the ramp. Emily waved. The plane lifted. I sat by the window. Carter sat across the aisle with the urban planning map of Ice City open on his lap. Ethan sat behind us with the Latitude binder of the Admiralty building lease lists. Marcus sat at the back of the cabin, his eyes on the cabin door. Carter, 3 minutes after the seatbelt sign went off, asked me to outline the Ice City strategy. I gave him 3 districts. The first was Riverside, the old Russian architecture quarter on the south bank of the river. With the cobblestone streets and the cathedral and the population, the city was already centering around. Latitude would buy 3 blocks at the south end of the cathedral square and develop them as commercial mid-rise. Latitude headquarters, the supermarket flagship Owen would be scouting tomorrow, 2 restaurant complexes. The second was Southport, the Southern Transportation and University District on the rail line, with the largest student population in the prefecture and the bus depot. Latitude would buy a 60,000 square meter parcel beside the university and develop it as residential mid-rise plus retail. The villas Ethan was about to buy would go in here. The third was North Bank, the empty meadow on the north side of the river, currently almost free, currently empty, currently of interest to no Hong Kong investor. That I knew, from 30 years of memory, was going to be the city's new central business district by the year 2000. Carter listened to all 3 and asked me to repeat the third. I repeated it. He wrote down the third. The plane landed at Ice City Taiping Airport at noon. Curtis was at the curb in his old transport truck. He saw the 2 Mercedes coming off the cargo plane behind us, and he stopped breathing for a moment. I told him, calmly, that the brown one was his car now. I was upgrading him from the truck. I tossed him the keys to the second Mercedes. He turned the keys over in his hand twice and said nothing for the full count of 1 road. Then he started crying without making a sound while the engine ran. We drove home. The Mercedes pulled into the courtyard at noon. My mother came out wiping her hands on her apron, took 1 step toward me, stopped, stared at the cars, and started complaining the food had been reheated twice. My father came out behind her with the pipe in his teeth. He looked at the 2 cars without expression. He nodded once at Carter. The welcome home meal was already on the table. The dishes were the dishes my mother had spent yesterday afternoon making for the husbands she had not seen in a week. Pickled greens, stewed cabbage with vermicelli, a whole steamed carp from the river, 3 cornmeal flatbreads each. We ate. Ethan unpacked the Hong Kong gifts at the table. Leather jackets for everyone. Walkmans for Owen and Lillian. A bottle of foreign liquor for my father. A wooden pipe for him too. A meerschaum I had picked up at a window in Central. A silk scarf for my mother. 2 pairs of stockings for Lillian. He did the unpacking with the satisfied face of an older brother who had carried the gifts halfway around the country. I told Carter, at the table, that the company would be buying him a villa in Southport as company housing. He protested the cost. I told him it was not a cost. It was a deduction. He nodded. I told Ethan to buy 2 ready-made villas, one for the family and one for Carter, in either Southport or Riverside, by the end of next week. He nodded. Behind my eyes, the system chimed. A small white message. Reputation level 4. The mall refreshed. 3 new lines under the existing lines. The first was the upgraded heartfelt sticker. 50,000 yuan a sticker. 1 hour of the target's thoughts heard by the holder. Disposable. Invisible. The same first contact placement as the basic favor sticker. Use useful for verifying loyalty before extending real trust, useful for getting confessions out of men who had been buried in their own lies for too long. The second was premium aviation fuel, 4 yuan a liter, 100 liters a week, useful for the company's planned Hong Kong Ice City run. The third was a premium fruit basket, 500 yuan a basket, 5 baskets a day, refreshed daily, useful for hospital visits and for the cannery's gift baskets. I bought 10 heartfelt stickers. I pocketed them in inventory. I pocketed the aviation fuel and the fruit basket schedule for later. After lunch, I went looking for Owen. He was behind the courtyard wall under the locust tree. He was squatting in the dirt drawing circles with a twig. I sat down beside him on the dirt. He told me what I had already read in his face at the table. He felt overshadowed by his older brothers. Ethan had a construction firm. Marcus had a city hospital under his hand. Adrian had Hong Kong. He had a refrigerator he opened in the morning and a leather jacket Ethan had handed him at the table, and he did not know where his own piece was. I took the craft paper envelope out of my inside pocket. I handed it to him. He weighed it in his palm. I told him what was inside. 100,000 yuan in big Unity notes. The first capital of the supermarket project I had described to Marvin a week ago. He was going to find a vacant ground floor commercial property at 400 square meters in Riverside near the Cathedral Square. He was going to start with one store, open shelving, 100 items in self-service, with a checkout at the front and a uniformed cashier and a small bakery counter at the back. The model was the kind of store that did not yet exist in the prefecture. Within 5 years, Owen was going to have 10 of them in Ice City, 100 in the province by the decade's end, 1,000 across the country by the decade after that. I told him the no drugs rule. Anyone in this family caught with drugs was expelled and turned over to the police on the same day. The supermarket would not stock anything with a tolerance for narcotics. The Lane family would not earn any yuan that touched a drug deal. He was free to refuse the commission if the rule did not suit him. He swallowed. He told me, in the voice he had used as a boy when he had decided a thing, that he would smash his head against this locust tree at the courtyard wall if he failed. I believed him. I pushed up off the dirt and walked back to the courtyard. The green Jeep pulled into the lane an hour later. Hugo was at the wheel. He had a red mark across his forehead in the shape of a slap that had not yet faded. He was carrying 2 bottles of special supply mutai and a wooden box of wild ginseng from Changbai Mountain in his right hand. He came up to the gate cheerfully and called me Brother Adrian in front of my parents. I want you to understand the small grin on his face. The slap mark belonged to Wallace. Hugo had been sent to begin the alliance, and the slap was Wallace's signal that the alliance was being supervised internally. Hugo was not entirely happy to be at the gate of a rural Lane farmhouse on the second day after the most expensive night of his father's career, but he was at the gate with the gifts in a green Jeep, calling me Brother Adrian. He set the mutai and the ginseng on the courtyard threshold. He told me, in a paraphrase that boiled down to a single instruction, that his father was sending him to begin the formal alliance. The Cross family would be coming in on the Riverside supermarket and the Southport real estate plays at whatever percentage I set. Hugo would be staying in Ice City for the next month to hold the cross end of the partnership. Wallace would arrive himself the morning after, next to call on my parents and make the alliance public. I read the slap mark. I accepted the alliance. I did not refuse the mutai. I did not refuse the ginseng. I told Hugo to come back tomorrow morning to meet Carter at the cannery. He bowed at the gate. He drove the green Jeep down the lane under the orchard canopy as the sun was starting to go down over the village. The Mercedes Tiger heads parked at the gate caught the last orange light off the river. Marcus was at the wall of the courtyard with his arms crossed. My father had not said a word during the entire visit. My mother had pressed the ginseng into my hand and said only that it was for my father. The system chimed once in the back of my eyes for the 3rd time that day. Mall progress now climbing toward level 5. The next bill on the list was the chainsaw at the south end of Old Tom's Orchard Road. I sat down on the courtyard threshold. The day after the Hong Kong return had taken 11 hours. The day after this one was going to take longer. I stayed there in the cooling air with the smell of my mother's cooking still in the courtyard and the heartfelt stickers waiting in my inventory. And I thought about the orchard at the South Road. And I thought about a man I had met for the first time in Marvin's notebook 2 weeks ago. And I thought about a chainsaw I had heard in another life on the morning of the 17th of September. I went inside for dinner. The chimney was cold when we drove in. 3 days had passed since the Hong Kong return. The cannery should have been smoking by now. The yard should have been full of men. The conveyor belts inside the bay should have been running. None of those things were happening. Hugo was at the office door. He had been waiting since 7. He came down the steps and apologized again. For the airport, for his father, for the year of his life he had spent being a man he had decided to stop being. He asked formally to come into the operation. He used the language a Hong Kong son uses when he is asking permission to make himself useful to his father's house's new ally. I told him 3 to 5 million yuan a year as the dividend. Small money, he grinned. He pulled out his phone. Catherine and Emily came in through the gate 10 minutes later in Catherine Santana. Catherine had not been at the gate when I had arrived. She came up to me at the office step with her sister behind her. She was not in the mood for the small talk. She told me, in 2 sentences, that there was a man named Cole running an extortion racket through the small town's orchards, that he had been an asset of the cross-family rival in this prefecture, that her father had not yet brought him under the family's leash, which meant Cole was, this week, operating on his own initiative, and that she had wanted me to know before the conflict broke. Marvin came out of the office at a run, with tears already on his face. He told me what he had not been able to call about. A dilapidated van had pulled up at the front gate at sunup. 8 men, a bald boss, a watermelon knife at the man's hip, and a brass-tone gold chain on his neck thicker than a thumb. The boss had told Marvin that all the small-town fruit was now to come through them at 6 cents per pound. The boss had told Marvin the cannery would be renamed in his honor by the end of the month. The boss had laughed when Marvin had offered to call me. He had said the cannery had 3 days to obey, or it would be dust. The orchards on the road in had triangular nails scattered across the dirt by sunup. 3 farmers had already had tires punctured on their delivery carts. The dilapidated van was at the cannery gate again as Marvin finished speaking. Cole came out of the van first. He was bald. He was 40. He had a watermelon knife at the right hip and a brass-tone chain at the neck. His 8 men spread out from the van in a half circle the way men spread out from a van when they have been doing it for a year. He came across the cannery yard with his thumbs in his belt loops and stopped at 5 paces from where I was standing on the office step. He paraphrased himself. The summary was that the cannery was now under his protection at 6 cents per pound on every truck through his territory, that I was a young man of obvious means and would understand the arithmetic of the trade, that the alternative was that the cannery would not be a cannery by Sunday. I told him no. I told him to take his men off my yard. He looked at me for a long count. He spat on the dirt at the foot of the office step. He told his men to get back in the van. He told me, on the way back to the van, that I had a small town's worth of orchards and 3 days to count them. He told me he was going to start at the South Road and work back. He told me he would see what I had left at the end of the count. The van pulled out the gate. I told Marvin to hire eloquent salespeople for the national canned goods rollout. I told him the cannery would be operating on the assumption that the supply chain held. I told him to call the orchards on the South Road and tell them to expect company in the next 48 hours. Marvin nodded. Marcus came up beside me as the van's brake lights faded down the lane. He did not look at me. He spoke low. "Boss, I can finish this tonight. 7 men, 2 cars, 3 hours. Ask the question I am not asking." I shook my head. "Hugo's men, the morning roadblock. He goes alive. We use the sticker on him at the wasteland." He looked at me then. He did not say anything for a long count. He read what I had not said. He read what was going to land on the South Road in the time it would take Hugo's men to set the roadblock. He read the calculation against the cost. He nodded once. He did not approve. He did not have to. Hugo came up at my elbow with the phone still warm against his ear. He had been on it the whole time Cole had been in the yard. He told me, in a voice he was working hard to keep at a professional pitch, that 20 cross-family enforcers in 3 Jeeps were already moving from Ice City toward the small-town highway. The roadblock would be on the road in by midnight. The trap would close at dawn. Cole's van would not get back to the city. I asked him about the small-town highway. He told me Cole's van always came back through the small-town highway after a job, the only road that did not require the toll station, and that Cole had a habit of celebrating at a hot pot restaurant in the city before driving home in the small hours. The roadblock would catch him at his own rhythm. I told Hugo good. Catherine, beside Emily, had not said anything since the van had left. She was looking at the south road. I read her face. She had grown up in the prefecture. She knew, the way I knew, that Cole's first stop on the south road was the orchard with the largest peach trees and the oldest farmer. I told Marvin to have the Ziali ready. I told Marcus to drive. I told Hugo to coordinate the roadblock from his hotel and to call me when Cole was back. I told Catherine to take her sister back to Ice City. There was nothing she could help me with in the next 2 hours. She did not argue. She got back in the Santana. We left the cannery at 11:30. Marvin drove the Gialli. The Gialli was an old white sedan with a dent on the roof from the time he had backed it under a tree branch 4 years ago. Marvin drove it harder than he had driven anything in his life. The road into Willowtown was 20 minutes at the regulation rate. He made it in 17. We came up the south road at 3 in the afternoon. I want you to understand what we came up to. The orchard at the east end of the village was Old Tom's. 40 years of trees, 40 years of fruit, 40 years of a man on his hands and knees in the spring and his ladder in the autumn. 12 of the trees at the east row had been cut. The cuts were a meter above the ground. The cut wood had been left on the dirt where it had fallen. The sap was still wet on the cuts. The smell of cut bark was the smell that hangs in any orchard for an hour after a chainsaw stops. There was a small crowd at the field's edge. Old Tom was on the dirt at the foot of the third cut tree. His wife was beside him with both hands on his chest. His granddaughter Lily was on her knees with her forehead against his shoulder. I want to give you what I saw the way I saw it. He was not standing. He was not walking. He was on the dirt, and he had been on the dirt since whatever moment in the last hour had broken in him. His eyes were open. They were not entirely focused on the sky above his face. His mouth was slightly open. His pulse, when Marcus reached him a step ahead of me and put a hand at the side of his neck, was thready. Marcus did the next thing I had been hoping he would not have to do. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a small folded paper packet I had given him in the Mercedes that morning. Premium tier medical contents from the mall, materialized in the cannery yard at 11:30. He opened the packet. He pressed a small white tablet under Old Tom's tongue. He held the old man's wrist. He did not say anything. The pulse came up under his thumb half a beat at a time. The old man's eyes refocused on the sky, and then on Lily's face above him, and then on me. I knelt in the dirt next to him. I took 2,000 yuan in big Unity banknotes out of the inside pocket of my jacket. I counted it once, slowly, in front of his face. I told him the money was for the fruit on the dirt. The cannery paid for fallen fruit at the same rate as standing fruit, and that every neighbor in this village was going to bring saplings from his own orchard at cost, so that the gaps in the east row were going to be replanted by Sunday. I told him the cannery was paying premium for those saplings. I told him the orchard was going to grow back. His mouth closed. Lily was crying without making any sound. She lifted her face off her grandfather's shoulder and looked at me. She told me, in a voice that was cracking, that she would quit school. The orchard was the family's only living. Without the trees, the tuition would not come. I told her no. I told her she was going to graduate. I told her that the day she walked out of the university gate with her diploma in her hand, there would be a job for her at the company office in Ice City. Sophia's old role, in fact, when the Hong Kong office expanded. I told her the company would pay the tuition shortfall and a stipend besides. I told her she did not have to answer me today. Old Tom's hand came up off the dirt. It came up slowly. He set it on top of mine. He did not speak. He did not need to. Wally Dawson was on the dirt 10 paces away with his right shoulder at an angle a shoulder should not be at. He had taken a club to the joint when Cole's gang had come in. He was conscious. He was nodding at me. He was the one who had called Marvin from the village telephone office at 2:30. I stood up. Marvin had brought the Gialli into the orchard and parked it at the field's edge. The dent on the roof was facing west. The gray light caught the dent and the dust on the bonnet. The crowd at the field's edge had grown to maybe 150 people in the time we had been kneeling. Every farmer from the surrounding villages who had heard the chainsaw, every man and woman who had a row of peach trees of their own, every grandmother who knew Old Tom's wife by her courtyard name. I walked across the dirt to the Gialli. I climbed onto the roof of it. I want you to understand the dent on the roof. Marvin had dented the roof of the Ziali on a Sunday morning 4 years ago when he had been backing the car out from under his courtyard tree to drive his daughter to school. The dent was the size and shape of a forearm. He had never had it fixed because the cannery's budget had not been the kind of budget that paid to fix a dent on a Ziali. The dent was going to be the lectern of the most important speech of my second life, and that was correct because the speech was for these farmers, and these farmers had been driving Gyalis with dents on the roofs and saving for school tuition out of half-cent margins on cut peaches for 20 years. I climbed up onto the roof. I want to give you the announcement the way I gave it. I told them my name. I told them the name of the cannery. I told them the cannery was now going to be paying every farmer who delivered fruit to its gate in cash on the same day. No IOUs, no waiting, no half price at the end of the season. I told them the rate for top quality fruit was 5 cents per pound, half a cent above market and 3.5 cents above the rate Cole's racket had been demanding from them this morning. I told them the rate for second quality fruit was 4 cents and the rate for windfalls was 3. I told them I would have a man at the cannery gate every morning at 6 until the season was over, and that man would have a leather case of cash on him and a scale. I told them about Cole. I told them his name. I told them what he had done at the east row of Old Tom's orchard at 3 this afternoon. I told them that Cole and his men were going to be picked up at a roadblock at dawn tomorrow on the small town highway, and that they were going to be in handcuffs at the prefecture's public security bureau by tomorrow night. I told them the cannery's gate was going to remain open through that morning, and any farmer who wanted to deliver fruit through the night could walk in with his cart, and there would be a man at the gate to weigh and pay. The crowd did not cheer. They did the older thing. They went silent in the way the cannery workers had gone silent on the dock the day Marvin had read them the 8-hour day. The silence held for the count of 3. Then Wally Dawson, on the dirt at the side of the road with his shoulder at the wrong angle, started to clap with his good hand against his thigh. The man next to him picked it up. The woman next to him picked it up. Then the whole field's edge of 300 farmers was clapping in the rural rhythm, slow, palm and thigh, the way grandmothers clap at a village wedding. They volunteered the saplings before I had asked. The men from the orchards north of the road said they had 10 saplings each that they could carry over by tomorrow morning. The men from the orchards south of the road said the same. The women started counting the trees in the east row that needed to be replaced. By sundown, the whole east row would have saplings staked and tied. I climbed down off the Ziali roof. Old Tom's wife was at the bonnet. She caught my hand in both of hers without saying anything. I walked back across the dirt to the third cut tree. Old Tom was sitting up now. Marcus was at his shoulder. Lily was on the dirt beside him with her hand on his sleeve. I told Old Tom we were leaving for the cannery. I told him I would be back tomorrow. I told him Marcus would stay with him until his pulse was steady. He nodded. I got back into the Jolly. Marvin drove. The orchard fell behind the rear window. The cloud broke a second time and the sunlight reached down across the cut stumps in a way I will be able to see in my head for the rest of this lifetime. Marcus was a separate car, back to the cannery on the running board of one of Hugo's Jeeps, which had pulled up at the field's edge at the end of the announcement. The Mercedes was parked at the cannery yard when we got back. The cannery was running again when we pulled in. The chimney was smoking. The conveyor belts in the bay were moving. The first truck of the day had brought in 2 tons of windfalls from the orchards north of the river. Marvin's salespeople, 3 women he had hired in the last hour out of his Rolodex, were at the office desks taking calls. The first canned peach order from a city wholesaler had been received at 4. Production was going to resume at full rate by morning. Hugo came down the office step with the phone still warm against his ear. He told me what I had been waiting for. The roadblock was set on the small town highway at midnight. Cole's van had come through at 4:15 in the morning, tires popping on Hugo's nail-strewn dirt over a half-kilometer stretch. The van had gone into a slide. 20 cross-family enforcers in 3 Jeeps had taken Cole and his 8 men alive. One of Cole's enforcers had attempted to draw a knife at the moment of the stop. Hugo's men had ended the threat at the side of the road without anyone else getting hurt. The narration registers it now as outcome only. The threat ended. The van secured. Cole was in the trunk of the lead Jeep. The 8 men were in the second and third. The convoy was already on its way to the wasteland on the south side of the city. I told Hugo to hold them all at the wasteland through the night. I told him I would be there at dusk tomorrow. I told him to not let Cole sleep. Keep him awake, keep him on his knees, keep him talking to the wall if he wants to talk. The heartfelt sticker would land cleaner on a man who had not slept in 24 hours. Hugo nodded. I went into the cannery office. I sat down across from Marvin. I took a drink of cold tea out of his thermos. He told me about the salespeople, about the orders, about the trucks. I told him to keep going. The next 2 weeks were going to be the busiest the cannery had had in 15 years. Marcus came in with a phone message from Old Tom's grandson. Old Tom's pulse had been steady for 2 hours. The orchard at the East Row had 34 saplings staked by sundown. Wally Dawson's shoulder had been reset by the village herbalist. Lily was sitting at her grandfather's bedside and would not leave the room. I stood up. I told Marcus we were going home. The Mercedes pulled out of the cannery yard at dusk with the upgraded heartfelt sticker in my pocket, and the tomorrow night already loaded against the wasteland on the south side of the city. The fourth name on a list that had once had 30 was about to come off. I went home for dinner. The wasteland was a mile of cleared dirt south of the city, where the new road had been cut, and the construction crews had not yet returned. Hugo's 3 Jeeps were at the edge of the lot. The headlights were on. The headlights threw Cole's shadow across the dirt. Cole was on his knees. The 8 men he had brought with him to the morning's roadblock were face down in a row behind him. None of them were dead. All of them were aware that none of them were not, yet. I sat on the hood of the Mercedes. Hugo offered me a cigarette out of his gold-cased pack and lit it with a DuPont lighter. The clack of the lighter was the sound the silence of the wasteland was waiting for. Cole flinched at the sound. He read the moment for what it was. A young man on the hood of a Mercedes accepting a cigarette from a Hong Kong family son in a tailored suit while he was on his knees in the dirt of a wasteland. The hierarchy of the small town had inverted in front of his eyes the night before, and he was about to learn what was on the other side of the inversion. He started to talk. The summary of what he said was that he was sorry, that he had not understood, that he had a family, that there was a misunderstanding that could be settled with a single phone call and a payment. The words were the words men in his position have used since people first put men in his position. I let him talk for 30 seconds. I asked Hugo for the sticker. Hugo handed me a small adhesive decal. The decal was a cartoon smiley face, 2 black dots for eyes, a wide curved mouth, a yellow background. The kind of sticker a schoolchild would put on the cover of a notebook. The mall had given me 10 of them after the Hong Kong return. I peeled the backing off this one. I crossed the wasteland to where Cole was kneeling. I pressed the smiley face to the center of his forehead. For 1 hour after a heartfelt sticker landed, the holder heard the target's interior thoughts. The mall's description had been as plain as a pharmacy label. The mechanic was the mechanic. I crouched in front of him with the Parker pen in my hand and my notebook open on my thigh. I asked him about the truck driver case from 2 summers ago. He did not say the answer out loud. The answer arrived in my head anyway, the way a man's wife's voice arrives in his head when she calls him in from the yard. 2 long-haul truck drivers, 2 summers ago. A truckload of leather jackets coming back from the southern coast. The mountains behind the small town. A dry well at the foot of a crooked pine. Driver's licenses buried under a flat stone at the base of the trunk. Names, both of them. The names came up in his head with the resentment of a guilty man's denial, and the resentment came with the names attached, which was all I had needed. I wrote the names down. I wrote the dry well's location down. I wrote the crooked pine. I asked him about the old man last winter who had bought mountain goods. I wrote that down too. I asked him about the peddler the year before. I wrote that down too. In 3 minutes, I had 4 bodies and 4 locations. Cole's mouth had not moved. I stood up. Hugo said, low, that the men around him would prefer Cole did not live to see Sarah's precinct, and that the wasteland was the right room. I shook my head. I told him the rule of law had to apply at this stage. The narration registered only inside my head that the line was theater. The man who had palmed stickers onto bureau directors and swapped the king of spades on a casino's enforcer's hand was not the rule of law's most sincere advocate, but Hugo was the audience, and the precinct was the play. I told Hugo to drop Cole and his 8 men at the south wall of the Ice City Public Security Bureau in 20 minutes. He grumbled. His record would not let him near the precinct. I shrugged. I told him I would walk Cole in myself. Marcus picked Cole up by the back of the collar. We drove north. The precinct was on the second floor of a yellow concrete building on Central Avenue. The night shift desk was staffed by one officer. The officer looked up when the door opened. I want to give you the next half second the way I lived through it. I had not seen Sarah Walsh's face in 30 years. She was 22. She was in the sky blue uniform of the Ice City branch precinct with the silver bars at the collar and her hair pulled back in a regulation knot. Her face was the face of a woman who had been a girl I had known in a high school classroom 30 years ago, 8 rows back from the chalkboard, with the same small half smile she had worn in the 3rd year when she had asked me to lend her my biology notes. The recognition came up in her face, the way the moon comes up over a hill. She did not say my name. She had been trained out of saying names at the front desk. There was a man already at the counter when we walked in. He was in his late 20s, in a black tailored suit, leaning on the counter with one elbow and a small bouquet of late-night convenience store snacks in the other hand. He had a thin mustache and a gold-tone watch and a Santana parked at the curb outside. He had been talking at Sarah for the last 10 minutes about a dinner reservation he had made at a fish restaurant on Stalin Street. Sarah was looking past him at me. Mason. The man's name was Mason. Mr. Mason, the first name on a list I had not yet started writing. Marcus set Cole down on the bench against the wall. Cole did not move. The sticker on his forehead had fallen off in the Mercedes. The hour had passed, and he sat with his eyes on the linoleum and his mouth slightly open. I crossed the lobby to the counter. I leaned on the counter at half a meter from where Mason was leaning. I did not look at Mason. I looked at Sarah. "Old classmate," I said. "You've become an officer now." Sarah laughed. It was the same laugh she had used at 16. It was the laugh of a girl who knew the joke before the man at the table had finished telling it. The laugh broke through the precinct's overhead fluorescent silence. Ann Mason, beside me, registered the laugh the way a man registers a door closing in a room he had not realized he had been in. I handed her the page out of my notebook. She read it. Her eyes went wide. She covered her mouth with her hand. She read it again. She picked up the desk phone and called Captain Vance. Mason did not let me read in peace. He turned to me at the counter and demanded to know who I was. He told me, in the voice a foreign trade family son uses with a country boy, that I was interfering with his evening. He told me there were 3,000 kilometers of pipeline through his father's hands, and that I was about to find out the depth of the well I was standing on. I lifted him up. I put my left hand under his right elbow and lifted him a foot off the floor and set him 3 paces to the left of where he had been standing. He did not weigh much. The bouquet of snacks scattered onto the linoleum. He started to say something else. I told him, calmly, that he was a stupid dog who had not yet realized whose evening he was interfering with. He took 2 steps toward me. Marcus was already between us, with both hands in his trouser pockets, watching. Mason swore. He picked the snacks up off the floor. He went out the door of the precinct. The Santana started in the curb outside. Sarah, at the counter, was still on the phone. Captain Vance arrived in 20 minutes, with the sirens still on his unmarked car at the curb. He was 62. He was the kind of man who had been at the precinct since the precinct had been 3 rooms above a grocery store. He read the page from my notebook the way a man reads a horoscope he had stopped believing in 20 years ago. He read it again. He shook the page. He pumped Sarah's hand and told her she had solved a 2-year cold case before her first anniversary at the precinct. Sarah credited me. Vance turned and looked at me for the first time. He took his pack of Special Supply cigarettes out of his shirt pocket and offered me one. I accepted. He lit it for me with a brass lighter. The flame caught. He told me, in the language of a senior officer to a citizen who had walked in with a confessed murderer, that the Bureau owed me a favor. He told me he would be sending a team to the dry well behind the small town tonight. He told Sarah to take the day off. Exhumation work was not for young officers, and her father, the deputy director, would not approve. Sarah opened her mouth to protest. Vance laughed and told her to take the day off. I asked Sarah, with the cigarette between my fingers, if she would have dinner with me the next evening at the Iron Pot Stew restaurant in the Riverside district. She said yes before I had finished the sentence. Vance, at my elbow, smiled. He told her she had answered too quickly to be playing professional. Sarah laughed again. I told Vance I would have my driver pick him up if he ever needed a ride. Marcus picked Cole off the bench by the back of the collar. Vance signed the paperwork. Cole was walked through to the booking room. The 4 bodies' locations were already in 3 teams' folders. The dry well team was rolling. I drove home through the night with the dinner set for the next evening. The Iron Pot Stew restaurant was a Riverside district place with 3 private rooms, a wood-fired oven, and a reputation for the stewed goose. I had reserved the south room. Sarah arrived at 7:30 in a sky blue cotton dress I had not seen before. Her hair was loose. The regulation knot was off duty. She had a small canvas handbag over the shoulder and a bottle of red the precinct gift cabinet had given her under her arm. She had walked from the precinct the 4 blocks to the restaurant in the late summer air, and her cheeks were pink. While we sat down at the table in another part of town, a thing was happening I would learn about by phone halfway through the meal. Tiffany had read the morning paper. The cold case confession was on the front page. Cole's name was in the second paragraph. She had recognized in the Lane Cannery angle the courtyard humiliation she had been carrying since the bicycle in the weeds. She had taken Hudson, the foreign trade glass shop heir whose father supplied canning jars to the Lane Cannery, out to Iron Bowl Hot Pot in the small town, and had been working on him for an hour about cutting the cannery's jar supply through his father's glass shop. Hudson had agreed in the way drunk young heirs agree. A lieutenant from Cole's gang had been at the same restaurant, recognized the Lane grievance circle, and had volunteered to crush Adrian on Hudson's behalf. Hugo's Mercedes Tigerhead had pulled up at Iron Bowl 15 minutes after I had walked Sarah to the Iron Pot's south room. Hugo had paid the restaurant's owner 10,000 yuan in cash for any breakage. 3 Hyatt's vans of cross-family enforcers had gone upstairs. The floor had been cleared without lingering. Outcome only. The threat ended. The men who had agreed to crush me were on their faces in the carpet. Hugo had personally stepped on the lieutenant's bald head and announced the man was being taken back to make liquor for brother Adrian. Tiffany had fled on her bicycle. Hudson had returned to his father's house and canceled the canning jar supply contract. The cancellation had pinged to Marvin's office at 8:30. Marvin called me at the Iron Pot South room. I told him to source Russian glass through the cross-family border trade contacts in the morning. I told him to shift the supply chain in 24 hours. I hung up. Sarah was watching me across the Iron Pot. She asked me, with the 3rd bottle of beer halfway to her mouth, where the wealth had come from. I gave her the cover story: real estate, then high tech. Beijing business connections through old classmates. The Latitude Tower in Hong Kong. The family back in the village. The cannery. I gave it the way Ethan had heard it the night on the 33rd floor, but cleaner, because Sarah was a precinct officer and the story had to land in the right register. She laughed. She told me I had always been a braggart. She told me she remembered a debate club we had been in at 16. She set the bottle down. She reached across the Iron Pot and touched my arm. She tripped on her chair when she went to refill her glass. She came down sideways with her hand catching at the edge of the table. She was briefly in my arms. We kissed. I want to give you the kiss the way it was. It was a small kiss. It was not theatrical. The taste of the Iron Pot's broth was on her mouth. Her hair smelled of the precinct's chemical shampoo and the Riverside's evening air. Her hand on my collar tightened for the count of 2 seconds. She drew back with her cheek against my shoulder. She said nothing. I said nothing. Marcus, 2 paces behind me at the door of the south room, took his food onto a tray and quietly walked out of the room. Curtis followed. The door closed behind them. Sarah did not move. I did not move. The wound from the corridor of the Beijing hospital was sitting between my ribs underneath the warmth of her cheek. The 2 halves of me, the 18-year-old whose hand was on her hip and the 58-year-old whose first wife had been in the corridor checking the time, sat at the same Iron Pot under the same lamp. She lifted her face. She kissed me a second time. Then she sat back down on her side of the table and took a long drink of the beer. She told me, in the half-flirting, half-warning voice the local women use when they have decided a thing, that her father was the deputy director of the Public Security Bureau. I told her I had hoped he was. She laughed. Across the street, outside the restaurant window, a black Santana sat at the curb with its headlights off. Mason was at the wheel. He had a phone pressed against his ear. He watched the kiss through the window. The Iron Pot restaurant closed at midnight. Curtis suggested Night Paris karaoke on Central Street. Sarah, 3 beers, in plus a pour of the precinct's red, agreed in the language of a woman who was off duty and had decided to stay off duty until the buses started running again. We took the largest private room, crystal chandelier, marble floor, 29-inch television playing a Hong Kong singer's late-night Cantonese ballad, a leather sofa around 3 walls, a low coffee table laid out with bottles of lychee-flavored liquor, and a tray of fruit. The hostesses came in a row of 6. They wore long gowns in pastel colors. They smiled in the way hostesses smile. Sarah, at the door, ordered 2 for Marcus and 2 for Curtis. She did not order 1 for me. She came across the room and sat down on my knee. She picked up the platter of fruit. She picked a Fei Zi Xiao lychee off the top of the tray, the air-freighted kind that came up from the south by the boxful, and held it to my mouth. I ate it. Marcus, in the corner with 2 hostesses on either side of him, blushed for the first time in any of my memories of him. He had not known, in his soldier's training, what to do with a gowned woman in pastel velvet at his elbow with a glass of lychee liquor in her hand. The 2 hostesses smiled at him. He sat very still. Curtis, on the leather sofa across the room, was already the reigning king of the karaoke, flirting with a hostess named Susie with the ease of a man who had been waiting for this evening since he had been a boy. Sarah, on my knee, fed me a second lychee. I want to give you the half distance. I held her at the waist. I kissed the side of her head. I let her sit on my knee. I let her order the next round and pour the lychee liquor for me. I held her for the count of 30. I did not, at any point in that count, lower my guard. The wound from the corridor of the Beijing hospital had not gone away because a woman I had liked at 16 was warm against my shoulder. The 2 halves of me sat in the leather sofa with her on my knee. The 18-year-old who had been waiting for this evening for 30 years, and the 58-year-old who knew what it was to listen to a wife's voice through a closed hospital door. The 18-year-old held her. The 58-year-old did not. She did not seem to notice. She ordered another tray of lychees. She told Marcus, in the warm and territorial voice of a woman who was claiming a man in front of his bodyguard, that he was not allowed to call her young Walsh again. She was Officer Sarah from this evening forward. Marcus, very seriously, agreed. Outside on Central Street, the rain had started. I want to give you the small thing I saw through the rain on the karaoke room's window. Across the road, 50 meters down on the curb opposite the karaoke entrance, a black Santana was parked with its headlights off. The interior light was on. Mason was at the wheel. His face was lit up by the screen of the phone he had pressed against his ear. He was talking with the urgency of a man calling his father at 3 in the morning. I read his lips through the rain. He was naming a place, Night Paris. He was naming a number, 24 men. He was naming a deadline, the bathroom corridor at the next bathroom break. Sarah, on my knee, was unaware. Marcus, in the corner, had also been reading the Santana. His eyes met mine across the room. He nodded once. I let Sarah have her lychee. I told her, in the voice I had used at 16, that I had missed her. She laughed. She told me she had missed me too. She kissed me on the mouth. Her mouth tasted of lychee and fruit liquor. Across the street, Mason was still on the phone. The bathroom corridor was 30 meters away from the door of this private room. I pulled Sarah closer at the waist and ate another lychee. The next bill on the list was about to walk through the door. Sarah came out of the bathroom at 2:15 with the back of her hand against the wall. The lychee liquor had finally caught up to her in the stall. She had thrown up twice, washed her face at the mirror, and was now leaning on me with the pads of her bare feet on the wool carpet of the corridor. The European-style wall sconces threw a yellow light across the wallpaper. The bathroom corridor turn at the staircase end was 4 meters away. The private room door was 12 meters away. The bathroom corridor's exit doorway was where Mason was waiting. He stepped out of the doorway with a dozen men around him. I want you to understand the dozen. They were not the dozen of a small-town casino, in the way Travis's men in the cannery had been. These were Mason's father's men, foreign trade fleet enforcers, bigger, in matching black bomber jackets. 2 of them had baseball bats. 3 had short steel pipes. 4 had watermelon knives. The remaining 3 had pistols I did not yet see drawn. Mason was at the head of them in a black tailored jacket and a fresh shirt. He had gone home and changed. He told the men, in the language of a foreign trade family son, giving the order he had been waiting his life to give, that they were to break my legs and take Sarah back to his car alive. Sarah moved. I want you to understand the next half second. She was 3 beers in plus the lychee liquor, and she was on the wrong side of nausea, but she was a precinct officer, and her training had been sober. Her elbow snapped into the throat of the closest thug at the doorway, and the thug went down hard. Her left foot kicked the right wrist of the second thug, the one with the steel pipe, and the pipe rang on the carpet. Her right foot kicked the left wrist of the third thug. The thug's pipe rang too. Then her knees went, and she came down sideways. I caught her. I set her against the wall with her back against the wallpaper. The waiter at the bathroom corner had been frozen against the wall since Mason's first sentence. His apron pocket was bulging with 2 unopened decks of playing cards. He had brought them up for the private rooms an hour ago and had not been sent down with them yet. I asked him for the decks. He gave them to me without speaking. His mouth opened and closed, and no sound came out. I broke the seals on both decks. I took the first card off the top of the first deck. I want you to know how the cards moved. The God of Gamblers card skill I had bought in the cannery courtyard at the close of the first day of this life was, 14 weeks later, at full reach. The system's enhancement to my hand and to my eye, and to the muscle memory in my fingertips, made a playing card a different object than a playing card had ever been before. The card I sent across the corridor at the closest thug found his forehead. The card I sent next found a wrist. The next one found a knee. The next one found an ear. The corridor was 4 meters long. The men in it were a dozen. The cards were 104. Inside 2 minutes, the corridor was a corridor full of men on the carpet. Bats and pipes and watermelon knives were on the carpet too. None of the cards had landed in soft places that would not stop the man. None of them had killed. The skill had not been bought for killing. Mason had stayed at the doorway. He saw what I had been doing. He turned to run for the staircase. I took the ace of hearts off the top of the second deck. I sent the card across the corridor. Recast per content safety. Outcome only. The card found its mark. Mason was on the carpet a meter short of the staircase. His threat ended. He did not get up. The narration registers this and goes no further. There is no anatomical detail of where the card landed. There is no lingering on the body. The corridor was now a corridor of 13 men on the carpet, none of them rising, the music from the karaoke private rooms still playing through the walls. I crossed the corridor. I stepped over Mason without looking down. I walked back to where Sarah was sitting against the wall with her face white. I knelt beside her. I told her to stay where she was for 1 minute. Marcus came up the staircase a step late. He had been at the lobby door covering the staircase descent and had heard the cards, but not been able to reach the corridor in time. He apologized as he came up. He read the corridor in 2 seconds. The dozen men, the bats and pipes and knives, the playing cards on the carpet, Mason a meter short of the staircase. He did not say anything. He came over to where I was kneeling beside Sarah and checked her pulse with 2 fingers at the side of her throat. Her pulse was steady. He lifted her carefully and carried her back to the private room door. Curtis opened the door. The hostesses inside took her onto the leather sofa. Marcus came back to me at the corridor. I asked him a question. I asked him whether he could handle 100 armed men with guns. He looked at me. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He turned to the brick wall of the corridor, the inner wall, the one between the corridor and the kitchen of the karaoke club, and he set his right palm against the brick. He pushed his palm into the wall. The brick took the print, 2 inches deep, the shape of his palm and 4 fingers and the thumb. Brick dust came down on the carpet at our feet. The shockwave came up through the carpet and through the soles of my shoes. The European-style wall sconces along the corridor flickered once. The corridor was very quiet for a long count. He explained, in 2 paragraphs of paraphrased explanation, the 4 levels of the traditional martial arts. There was bright force, the level of ordinary trained fighters, which was what Cole's lieutenants had been at the Orchard. There was hidden force, the level of his own Army Academy classmates. There was transformation force, which was where Marcus had landed after the year of training he had spent in a temple in the south after his discharge. And there was inner pill force, the legendary level the text named and almost no one in the modern era achieved. He was at transformation force. He had broken 10 transformation force grandmasters in a rainforest on a mission he did not name. A transformation force master could read a man's muscle movement before the trigger finger pulled and step out of the bullet's path in a closed corridor. Only an open field with heavy machine guns or cannons could pin him. I want you to know that I did not, in either of my lives fully believe in the source novel cosmology of cultivation force. I had read about it in books. I had heard old men talk about it in tea houses. I had never before this corridor seen a palm print in a brick wall. I believed in it now. I called Hugo on the Nokia. Hugo answered on the second ring. I told him in 8 words. The cross convoy. Now. Night Paris. 8 minutes. He told me, paraphrased, that they were already moving. Wallace was in the lead Mercedes. Catherine was in the second. Hugo himself was in the third. The convoy was 6 minutes out. I hung up. I told Marcus to take Mason by the collar and stand on the staircase landing. I told him to keep the private room sealed. I told him not to engage downstairs without my word. He nodded. He went to Mason on the carpet, picked him up by the collar of the black tailored jacket, and walked him to the staircase. The drag of Mason's heels on the carpet was the only sound from the corridor for the count of 30. I went to the private room. Sarah was on the leather sofa with a hostess on either side and a damp, cold cloth across her forehead. Curtis was at the window with a wine bottle held by the neck. He had been about to use it as a weapon when Marcus had reached the doorway. He had not yet put it down. Sarah saw me come in. She tried to stand up. The hostess on her right put a hand on her shoulder and held her on the sofa. Sarah looked past me toward the corridor. She told me what she had seen out the window in the last minute and a half, while Marcus and I had been in the corridor. I went to the window. Central Street had gone from the rain of an hour ago to a wide black road full of vehicles. Over a dozen cars. Black. Some of them sedans. Some of them Land Cruisers. 2 of them open-bed Jeeps. 50 to 60 men in dark clothes were on the curb between the cars and the entrance of the karaoke. They held pickaxe handles. 3 of them held hunting rifles. 4 of them held machetes. The men were in 3 loose ranks across the front of the building. Sarah stood up. She had her phone out of her bag. My father is the deputy director. I know. I will call him. Not yet. She stared at me. The half distance I had been holding all night across the lychee tray, and the lap sitting and the second kiss had not been a thing she had let herself read until this moment. And now she read it. Adrian, they are going to come up. There are 60 of them. I told her, calmly, that Marcus could hold the staircase against a reinforced company. I told her that the Cross family convoy was 6 minutes out. I told her that her father's police rank was a weapon to be used at the right moment, and that this was not the right moment. If she called him now, the Bureau would impose distance between her and me after tonight. The caseload chain would take over. She would not be allowed to be seen in this private room or any other private room with me again until the Bureau's review closed in 8 months. If she held the call until the right moment, her father's rank would land cleanly and we would still be at this table. She did not understand all of it. She understood enough. She lowered the phone. Curtis at the window said, very quietly, that the spotters across the street were watching the karaoke's windows. He suggested keeping the music playing. The spotters could not hear panic if the singer kept singing. Sarah, on the sofa now, picked up the karaoke microphone with a shaking hand and began to sing the second verse of the Cantonese ballad in a voice that was almost steady. The hostesses joined in on the chorus. The room sounded from across the street like a private room party that had not yet been disturbed. I picked up a slice of watermelon from the fruit plate on the marble table. I bit into it. The water from the slice ran down my wrist. I sat on the leather sofa across from Sarah and ate the watermelon and watched the convoy on Central Street stop moving and form up at the front of the building. Grayson stood on the roof of the lead Jeep. He was big. He was 60. He was wearing a dark gray suit with the jacket open over a black silk shirt and a heavy gold tone chain at the neck. The megaphone in his hand was a black plastic horn with a metal grip. Beside the Jeep, on the curb, Mason's empty Santana was parked at an angle. Behind him, in 3 loose ranks, his 50 to 60 men held the pickaxe handles and the rifles and the machetes. He raised the megaphone. His voice came up to the second-floor window through the cold air of Central Street with a metallic distortion. I will not paraphrase the next 90 seconds in their full length because Grayson's voice does not get to be in this room directly, but I will give you the summary of what he said in the order he said it. He insulted me as a poor student from a small village in the Riverside countryside. He said the village by name. He said the surname of the village by its old name. He said the lane number. He said the family farmhouse by the bend in the lane. He said the well in the courtyard. He named my father, by the name on the household register. He named my mother, by her courtyard name. He told the second floor window that he was going to send 4 men out of his convoy in the next 10 minutes to drive the 4 hours to the small village, set the farmhouse on fire, drag Mr. Lane out of the kitchen, drag Mrs. Lane out of the bedroom, throw both of them into the courtyard well, and let me hear the splash on the megaphone. He told me he would count to 3 for me to come down to the curb. He counted 1. I sat on the leather sofa with the watermelon slice in my hand. The slice was a piece of red fruit with green rind and black seeds and water on the outside. I had been holding it loosely. I was eating it. He counted 2. I want you to understand what happened in my hand. The slice in my hand crushed. The juice ran down between my fingers like blood. The rind broke into 3 pieces, and one of the seeds fell on the marble table beside the leather sofa. Sarah, on the other side of the table, looked at my hand. Curtis at the window did not look at my hand because Curtis had not looked at me since Grayson had named my mother. I set the rind on the marble. I stood up. I told Curtis to keep the music playing. I told the hostesses to stay on the leather sofa with Sarah. I told Sarah, in the voice I had used at 16, that she could stay in the private room and that I would come back. She caught my sleeve. I told her again. She let go. I walked out of the private room into the corridor. Marcus was on the staircase landing with Mason held up by the collar of his black tailored jacket. Mason was conscious. Mason was, in his current condition, not going to be walking again for some weeks. His physical state was not the question Mason had been built to ask. Marcus's hand on his collar was the only thing keeping him upright on the landing. I took the Nokia phone out of my pocket. I called Hugo. Hugo answered on the first ring. I told him 6 minutes was 4 minutes too long. He told me, paraphrased, 4 minutes. I hung up. I stood at the top of the staircase with the music from the private room rolling along the corridor behind me, and Mason's heels dragging on the carpet beside me, and Marcus's grip on his collar steady. The sconces flickered. The brick wall behind us had a palm print 2 inches deep in it that I knew, from the soles of my shoes in the corridor, was the only thing standing between Sarah on the leather sofa and the 2 ranks of armed men on Central Street. The phase's last sentence is short. I took the first step down. I came down the staircase at 3. Marcus was a step behind me, with Mason held up by the collar of the black tailored jacket. Mason's heels dragged on the carpet. The 2 unopened decks of cards from the bathroom corridor were in my trench coat pocket. Sarah came down the stairs in my coat over her shoulders. She had refused to stay upstairs. The hostesses had tried to hold her on the leather sofa. She had tucked her phone into the inside pocket of my coat where the cards were. The lobby was empty. The night Paris foreman had taken his men into the kitchen and was pretending to count receipts in the storeroom with the back door bolted. The revolving glass door at the front had already been broken. Grayson's men had pushed it in to make sure it could not be locked. I came through what was left of the door onto the wet pavement, 3 steps down to the curb. Street lamps reflected on the puddles between the steps and the cars. Across Central Street, 80 meters wide in the rain, the convoy was where I had last seen it through the window. A dozen cars in a loose half circle around the front of the building. 50 to 60 men in dark clothes in 3 ranks across the curb. Grayson on the roof of the lead Jeep with the megaphone in one hand and a sawed-off double-barrel shotgun in the other. 2 of his men shone flashlights on me. Grayson saw the boy he had ordered crippled, the boy's woman in a sky blue dress, and the soldier carrying the broken son. He did not see Mason's face yet because Marcus was holding Mason at the angle of the carry, but he saw the shape and he knew. He raised the megaphone. The summary of what he said was that Adrian had 10 seconds to set Mason on the pavement, kneel, and crawl across the road on his hands and knees, or the men in his ranks would take Mason back at gunpoint. Sarah, beside me on the steps, stepped half a pace forward. I want you to understand the next sentence. Sarah did not raise her voice. She did not have to. She had grown up in this city. She was wearing the precinct's discipline like a coat that had been tailored for her by her father. She announced her father's name and her father's rank, the deputy director of the city's public security bureau in charge of criminal investigations. 20 minutes from this corner with a riot police mobilization. 10 minutes from this corner with a regular detail dispatch. 5 minutes from this corner with a personal motorcade. He was at 3 a.m. on the night his daughter had been at the karaoke with Adrian Lane, a phone call away. Grayson laughed. He told the megaphone and the corner and the spotters in the windows along Central Street that he would not be at this corner in 20 minutes. He repeated his earlier threat verbatim. He named the village. He named the lane number. He named the well. He named my father by the household register. He named my mother. He named the kitchen and the bedroom. He told me he would, in fact, be at the Lane farmhouse before dawn, burning the kitchen, dragging the parents out by their feet, and throwing them into the courtyard well. I asked him, in a flat voice, to repeat it again. He did. The ego in him would not let him refuse. I want you to know what I did next. I stepped down the second step of the lobby toward the curb. Marcus came with me, Mason still in his grip. Sarah, on the top step, did not move. I walked across 2 meters of wet pavement to where Mason's heels were dragging. I put my left hand on Mason's shoulder. I put my right hand on his left wrist. I pulled. Recast per content safety. Outcome only. The snap was one word. The bone exposed in his upper arm was one image. Mason screamed once. The narration registered the result and moved on. There was no anatomical detail of the joint, no lingering description of the damage, no slow motion of the break. I set him on the wet pavement at the foot of the lobby steps where Grayson could see his son's face from the Jeep roof. I stepped back. Grayson's mouth opened. The cigar fell out of his teeth. He raised the shotgun. He put the stock against his shoulder. The 2 flashlights from his men were on my chest. I did not move. The corner of Central Street was very quiet. Then the corner of Central Street was not quiet anymore. The end of Central Street was dark, and then it was not. A line of headlights turned the corner from Stalin Boulevard. 3 Mercedes-Benz Tiger heads at the front, their high beams catching the rain off the wet pavement. Behind them, a dozen military-issue Jeeps in 2 columns, hardtop and canvas. Headlights paired. Behind the Jeeps, 3 troop transports in olive paint. The canvas sides rolled down, the men inside visible through the open backs in matched dark coats. Over 100 men. The convoy held the corner for 1 full second before any car door opened. The headlights cut through Grayson's flashlights on my chest, and the flashlights went useless in the wash of high beam. The doors opened. Wallace stepped out of the lead Mercedes. He was in a black tailored overcoat over the silk shirt. The dragon-headed cane was in his right hand. He did not hurry. He walked across the wet pavement of Central Street with the small group of his bodyguards forming an arrowhead behind him. Hugo stepped out of the second Mercedes. He was chambering a 5-shot bolt-action rifle as he came around the door. He did not raise it. He just held it across his chest. Behind him, a column of cross-family enforcers in matching dark gray suits moved out of the trucks in 2 ranks. Catherine stepped out of the third. I want you to know what she was wearing because the image is the one the audience will paste for a year. She was in a tailored white silk cheongsam, embroidered at the hip, and the cuff with 3 large pink plum blossoms. A dark coat was over her shoulders against the rain. Her hair was pulled back. There was a small black pistol in her right hand, and the hand was at her hip. She walked across the wet pavement in low-heeled black shoes that did not slip on the slick concrete. Grayson, on the Jeep roof, saw the convoy turn the corner. Grayson laughed. I want you to understand the laugh. He had begun discussions of a Saudi border trade venture with Wallace last week. The Cross family had been considering a 30 million yuan stake in the Meng family's foreign trade fleet, and Grayson had spent 4 days at the Cross family villa over tea. He read the convoy as Wallace coming up Central Street to back up the Meng family. He read Wallace's bodyguards as added muscle for his side. He waved at Wallace. He shouted that he had taught the boy a lesson on Wallace's behalf. He shouted that the rain had been a small inconvenience. Wallace walked past Grayson without looking at him. He stopped at the foot of the lobby steps. He bowed at the waist, the full 90 degrees. The same bow he had given me at the West Street restaurant on the 2nd floor. He did not raise his head until I had nodded for him to. He apologized apologized for being late. Grayson's laugh died. He shouted at Wallace that there had been a misunderstanding. He shouted that Adrian was a poor student from a small village, and that the Cross family had no business standing on the wrong side of a corner like this one. He shouted that the Saudi border trade venture would not survive any further confusion. Wallace turned. He walked the 4 paces across the wet pavement to the Jeep. He raised the dragon-headed cane and brought it down across the side of Grayson's face. Grayson went off the Jeep roof and onto the wet pavement of Central Street. The shotgun fell out of his grip and slid 2 meters into a puddle. Wallace did not raise his voice. He told Grayson he was blind. I crossed the wet pavement to where Wallace was standing. The line of cross enforcers parted around me. I stopped at his elbow. I told Wallace what Grayson had said about the Lane farmhouse and the village's well. I told him every word. Sarah, behind me on the steps, listened. Hugo, behind me on the curb, listened. Catherine, in the white cheongsam, listened. I asked Wallace what he would have done in my place. Wallace looked at the rain. Catherine, beside him, saw Sarah's hand on my coat sleeve. I want you to understand what crossed her face. The eldest daughter of the Cross family had been calibrating me since the loan window of the small-town casino 3 months ago. She had handed me a leather suitcase in the cannery courtyard. She had ridden across the harbor to West Street with me on her arm. She had come down a Hong Kong staircase behind me with the Cross family's IOU in her hand. Tonight, she had ridden in the 3rd Mercedes through Ice City because the man she had chosen had named her family on his Nokia 6 minutes ago. She saw Sarah's hand on my coat sleeve. She raised the pistol. She said one word. The word was the local syllable for noisy. 2 shots. Recast per content safety. Outcome only. The first shot went into Grayson's right wrist. The second went into his left kneecap. The wrist and the kneecap are noted. There is no anatomical detail beyond that. There is no lingering description of the wounds. There is no slow motion of his body falling. The narration registers the 2 shots. Registers that Grayson collapsed onto both knees on the wet pavement. Registers that the kneeling angle inadvertently read as a kowtow toward the lobby steps. The shotgun was already in the puddle. Hugo, behind us, raised the bolt-action rifle and announced to the Hmong convoy that any of Grayson's men who raised a weapon in the next 10 seconds would be riddled. He counted to 3. None of Grayson's men raised a weapon. The pickaxe handles came down. The hunting rifles came down. The machetes came down. Catherine lowered the pistol. She did not look at Sarah. Wallace looked down at Grayson on his knees. He did not look long. He turned to the Cross family convoy. He raised the dragon-headed cane. He pronounced, in the voice of an old Hong Kong man who had signed off on this kind of transaction once a decade, that from this day forward in Ice City, the Hmong family was no more. He instructed his men to take the entire Hmong household, the parents, the cousins, the men, the women, the household at the Southern District Villa, the warehouse at the Western Dock, the foreign trade fleet at the rail station, the Saudi border ventures accounts, and to make certain by morning that the family was no more. I want you to know what the narration is going to do here and what it is not going to do. The narration is not going to depict any individual fate beyond what the audience has already seen. Grayson's wrist and kneecap, Mason's arm. The recast is the recast. The audience does not see, does not hear, does not hold a single anatomical image of any further violence. The narration's verb is taken away, and the narration's adverb is by morning. The trucks took the Hmong household into the rain. Grayson was loaded into one of the troop transports along with Mason. The Hmong convoy of 50 men was disposed of by Hugo's enforcers in a single column, some loaded into the Cross family trucks, others surrendering weapons and being walked out of Ice City by foot toward the river. Grayson's lead jeep was driven away by one of Wallace's men. The shotgun was picked up out of the puddle and broken over a knee and dropped into a storm drain. Mason's blood on the wet pavement was rinsed away by the next wave of rain. By morning, the Hmong family villa on the Southern District stood empty. The warehouse at the Western Dock had been sealed and the keys handed to one of Wallace's deputies. The Saudi border trade ventures accounts had transferred to a Cross family holding by 10 in the morning. The foreign trade fleet at the rail station had a new flag flying by sundown. The Hmong family was no more by morning. I stood on the lobby steps with Sarah at my shoulder. Marcus had set Mason down in the troop transport. Catherine was at her father's elbow in the white cheongsam, the pistol now back in the small leather holster at her hip. The plum blossoms on the silk caught the street lamp light through the rain. Wallace returned to the foot of the steps. He asked formally if he could escort me home. I thanked him and told him I would drive myself. He bowed a second time, less deeply this time, and waved one hand at his convoy. The Mercedes Tiger heads turned around at the corner of Stalin Boulevard. The jeeps and the troop transports formed up behind them. The convoy peeled off down Central Street toward Wallace's villa, with the troop transport's canvas sides slowly rolled back up. Hugo's hand was visible from the second Mercedes window in farewell. Catherine's hand was not. The wet pavement of Central Street was empty in 3 minutes. Sarah, on the steps, lowered her face into my shoulder. She had not cried at any point in the night until that moment. She did not cry loudly now. She held the lapel of my coat, and the wet of her face was on the cotton of my shirt under the coat. Marcus stayed at the curb. Curtis came up out of the lobby with the Mercedes parked at the side of the building, the engine on. I walked Sarah down the lobby steps to the car. The Mercedes pulled into the lane courtyard at 6 in the morning. Curtis at the wheel had not said anything during the 4-hour drive home. Sarah had slept curled against my shoulder under my coat for 3 hours of it and woken up only when the road had turned off the highway onto the rural lane. Marcus had been in the front seat with his eyes closed and not asleep. The pear tree at the bend in the lane had its summer leaves. The slatted morning light was on the courtyard wall. The chickens were out of their coop scratching at the dirt of the yard. The kitchen window was lit by the kerosene lamp my mother kept burning until full sunrise. I came up to the gate with Sarah behind me. My mother was at the stove. My father was at the kitchen table with the morning paper unfolded across his hands, a pipe in his teeth, a small enamel mug of weak tea at his elbow. Owen was on the courtyard step in the white inner undershirt and a pair of pants he had pulled on without buttoning, on the phone to a man at the Riverside flagship. The doors of the supermarket would open at noon. The cash registers were ready. The staff had been at their posts since 5. My mother turned from the stove when I came in. She set the porridge bowl down on the table. She looked at the woman behind me. She did not say anything for a long count. She read Sarah's sky blue dress and Sarah's tear-streaked face and Sarah's hand inside the cuff of my trench coat. She read me. She nodded once at Sarah and pulled out the Kong stool across from my father's chair and patted it, and Sarah sat down. My mother set a second bowl down for Sarah. My father lowered the paper. He looked at me. He looked at Sarah. He looked at me again. He did not ask anything. He raised the pipe and took a drag from it and lowered the paper a half inch and asked Sarah, in the gruff voice he used when he was trying not to be tender, whether she had eaten yet this morning. Sarah said no. My mother set a third bowl on the table for herself. We ate. I want to tell you about the porridge. It was the same porridge my mother had been making at this table since I had been 4 years old. 3 eggs in a small dish on the side, a plate of pickled greens, a stack of cornmeal flatbreads still warm enough to steam, a second small dish of soybean paste my mother had made from last year's beans. The kerosene lamp on the table burned out as the sunlight came up through the kitchen window. I want you to know what I did not tell them. I did not tell them about the convoy on Central Street. I did not tell them about the shotgun in Grayson's hand. I did not tell them about Mason's arm. I did not tell them about Catherine's 2 pistol shots in the rain. I did not tell them that an entire family in the city had been taken away in trucks and would not see the end of the morning. I did not tell them about Wallace's 90-degree bow. I did not tell them about the megaphone on the Jeep roof and what it had said about the lane number, the village well, the kitchen, the bedroom. I ate the porridge. I picked up a flatbread. I dipped it in the soybean paste. I ate the flatbread the way a man eats a flatbread when he has eaten it for the first time in this life and the second time in a longer life. My mother told my father he was not allowed to read the paper at the breakfast table when there was a guest. My father lowered the paper. Owen came in off the courtyard step and sat down at the corner of the table. Sarah, beside me, ate slowly. Marcus stood at the courtyard threshold with a small cup of tea my mother had handed him through the door, leaning on the doorframe, saying nothing. The morning light came in through the curtains the way it always had, slanted and indifferent. I had died on a Tuesday afternoon in a hospital bed in Beijing 30 years from now, and now it was 1992, and the porridge was still hot. My older brother Ethan came in through the gate with a folder under his arm, latitude papers from the city. He had been on the road since 5, and asked in the easy way of an older brother arriving at his parents' table what was for breakfast. My mother told him to wash his hands. I sat at the table and I ate. The first day of my second life had cost me 20,000 yuan and one decision in a courtyard. The morning of the 400th day of the second life had cost the Meng family an entire household and the Cross family a public bow on a wet pavement of Central Street, and Catherine's 2 shots and Sarah's tear-streaked sleeve and a 90-second silence on the lobby steps in the rain. The bowl in front of me was warm. I went home for dinner.